to call to order the meeting of the Board of Directors of the Marin Municipal Water District on February 1st, 2022. Could I have a roll call, please?
Director Gibson.
Here.
Director Kohler.
I'm here.
Vice President Schmidt.
Here.
And President Russell.
Here. Need a motion to adopt the agenda.
So moved. Second.
Roll call.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Russell.
Aye. Okay, any public comment on that issue?
There are none.
Okay, great. Okay, so.
Oh, I apologize. Mr. Rick Adler actually wants to leave a comment.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Adler.
Did I miss the beginning of public comment?
No.
We're in closed session public comment right now.
Oh, on the subject that you're going into the closed session for, right?
Correct.
Okay, well, yeah, I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. From what I understand, that the pipeline is no longer an emergency, so you have to do the environmental impact, which is what the people from the North River was wanting you to do anyway. So now you just have to argue with them about how they want it to turn out, and how you want it to turn out, what's best for your, but best environmental impact for your purposes or for their purposes. But I suggest that this will be just the first of many if you continue the pipeline project of all the counties, cities, boards of water, bicycle interests, just a myriad of people that are going to be taking to court or mediation to discuss all these things. You know, it'll just be endless. And if after all that you finally do get the pipeline built, it'll be way over budget and take a lot longer than you think, because everything costs more and takes longer than you think. And when you get there, if we're so desperate that we need to use the pipeline for water, Central Valley will be even more desperate because they're much drier than we are. There are many more people needing the water, factories, farms, cities, much larger than ours. You'll have to enter into the water wars with people who have been doing it for 100 years, where water's for fighting and whiskey is for drinking. And they'll be much better at it than you are. So I suggest you find new sources of water here in Marin, which will be much easier and better. There are 3 sources of water that will have very little or no environmental impact, and almost nobody will object to. And that is, number 1 is the wastewater. Take the $100+ million and build a plant to take the wastewater from Marin, turn it into potable water. And number 2 would be desal. The water will be always there in the bay, but I don't propose you do the reverse osmosis. It's very expensive and very high tech, high pressure. You do it by using solar electricity to heat the water and evaporate it, condense it, and you wind up with salt that people can spread on the roads for snow. And the third source that'll be available no matter drought or flood is fog. Build a fence to capture the fog. And I'm out of time, so I thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. There are no further public comments.
Okay, with that, we're going to adjourn to the closed session.
Okay. Okay, sir.
The closed session was adjourned at 7:06 with no reportable action. So now we are going back to our open session. And who's going to do the closed session report out?
I think you did an excellent job just now, President Russell.
Wasn't sure that it was.
We'll accept that as the report out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
How about public comment on items not on the agenda?
Yes, sir. We have a few public comments. Allison Hess, James Krajewski, then Rick Adler. Ms. Hess, please. Go ahead, Ms. Hess. Okay, I'll get back to her. How about Mr. James Krajewski? Oh, go
Hi.
ahead.
Okay, thank you. I want to comment tonight on what I perceive to be a persistent problem for the district. Namely, there is an unfortunate level of dysfunctional communication and a lack of transparency that's evident in a couple of areas. First, there's a major problem finding information about water use in Marin on the website. Water users should not have to dig through pages and pages of multiple documents to find basic information such as the use of water by various categories. The water use data need to be aggregated into a section that's easy to find and provides the public with an analysis of use by various parameters. Why hasn't this been fixed over the past few months? Moving on, I see another problematic area that shares similarities, the problems of the data scattered about on the website that I just mentioned. The district can enhance transparency by rethinking how it structures its reports, and that includes meeting agendas also. For example, tonight's agenda and background totals 240 pages, all those pages without a consecutive page numbering system. There are no clickable electronic links between agenda items and the sections being discussed. Tonight, there is an agenda item on a strategic water supply assessment project proposal. There's no link in the agenda to be able to quickly go to the report. Instead, users need to scroll through over 100 pages to find that particular report. Reports on the website suffer from similar problems. There are not internal links in the documents that allow easy movement between sections and appendices. So trying to find a particular appendix may require scrolling through literally hundreds of pages in some cases. Earlier this year, the mayor of Richmond sent out a notice of the new format for agendas of the city council meetings. The formatting makes it simple to follow the agenda and quickly switch to the background material for each item. If other jurisdictions can make an agenda user-friendly, why would Marin Water District choose not to do so? The Marin Water District should follow the lead and fix the problem of confusing reports, agendas, and attachments. The district's disorganized approaches to providing basic information do not reflect well on the district. If the district is capable of getting basic information organized, or not capable rather, what is the message to the public about the district's ability to make sound decisions? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hess, are you ready to speak? Can you speak? Okay, we'll come back to her. Mr. Adler?
Yes, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. I know after a long day, a tough closed session, you're all probably tired, and here comes that Adler guy again. So, and I know that, the tendency would be when I open my mouth to speak, probably some of you close your ears to listen, but I thank you
Never.
for hearing me anyway. So I again urge you to abandon the Intertie emergency pipeline project because I think it won't produce any water in the long run, and it'll take all your time and energy. It'll be a drain pipe draining your time, energy, and money away. It won't be a pipeline for incoming water, but we definitely need new sources of water because of growth, which is inevitable. And the state of California keeps passing all these laws mandating growth, which mandates new hookups. And even if you didn't do the new hookups, you'll have more and more people in Marin using more and more water because people move to where the money is. And there's a lot of money in Marin. And so I suggest the 3 sources of water that aren't subject to drought and aren't subject to flood that are always there is one is the wastewater. $100+ million for the pipeline would go a long ways to establishing a plant to a facility to remove the halfway treated wastewater, which is halfway clean, to make it all clean and usable. The other source of water is the bay. There will always be water in the bay, drought or flood. And I would suggest that you do desalinization, but again, not through the reverse osmosis, which everybody seems to be stuck on, which is very expensive, but very high tech, very high pressure, prone to failure. And the third is fog. Fog happens in drought years, it happens in flood years. And you build a stainless steel fence that will capture the fog. So I guess I'm out of time, and I thank you very much.
Oh, you have 41 seconds left,
Oh, good,
or 39 now.
good. Well, I noticed that the district that handles the waste, there was a study done, I think I saw it on your website, that they could produce 25% of Marin's needs from the wastewater by building a facility that turns it into pure water. Another 25% could come from desal, and maybe you could get 5 or 10% from fog. And it might seem like a little, but you spend an awful lot of money to get 5% of conservation. So now I am really out of time. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Ed?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. The agenda for last Thursday's Finance Committee meeting had a discussion of possible June ballot measure to repeal 2010's Measure S that required voter approval for desal. When that item was removed from last week's agenda, I expected it would show up here tonight since it seemed more appropriate for a full board meeting, but it's not on tonight's agenda. It's important that the board move ahead with removing this impediment to proceeding with desal, if that's what the next few months' planning activities suggest as part of our achieving drought resiliency. With fear of the recent crisis fresh in voters' minds, and with the recent revelation of just how unsatisfactory a pipeline would be with East Bay Mud's draconian restrictions, there could not be a better time to get such a ballot measure approved. Lay on top of that, drought-struck Sonoma's plan last fall to cut our water allotments next year by more than half compared to last year. Now is the time to move forward with a ballot measure to rescind Measure S. I hope the board will have this important issue on its next agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Phil Sauter?
Good evening. Conservation isn't on tonight's agenda, but I think we all agree that it's critical to the district's water security and that short-term responses to climate events is not a sustainable approach, and it sends mixed messages to our customers. I'd like to see us commit to making long-term managed water conservation a major part of any plan to improve water security. Any long-range conservation plan starts with knowing where we are now. The pros think in terms of millions of gallons per day and acre-feet of storage, but as district customers, we just get to see the hundreds of cubic feet that show up on our water bills. During the past 2 weeks, I started asking friends a simple question: how many gallons of water do you use every day? Out of more than a dozen folks, there were only 3 of us who had an answer. Most folks had no idea. So I went looking on the district's website to find info on per capita gallons per day and struck out. Then I found a website that had 7 years of per capita daily water usage for Marin as well as for other water districts throughout the state. That was an eye-opener. I learned that 75% of the district's water is used by residential customers and that they've been using a remarkably steady 85 gallons per day per capita. The one exception was last year when we dropped to 75 gallons per day, or a 12% decrease. In our best month, November, we were down almost 30%, and that was right after the heavy rains. Marin isn't the biggest water user in our area. That title goes to Hillsborough, but we're not the thriftiest either. 3/4 of the districts in our area use less water per capita than we do. On that same website was a discussion of indoor water efficiency standards being set by the state: 55 gallons per day through 2025, 47 for the next 5 years, and 42 after that. The state thinks most districts already meet that standard, but Marin isn't one of them. This tells me that number one, our customers are likely to be well above state standards, and number two, they don't know it's coming. It also suggests to me that we should be looking to reduce our usage by 30 gallons per capita per day, or 40% on a long-term basis, and that we should get moving right now. So I'll make two specific recommendations. First, with the next billing cycle, put each customer's daily water use in gallons, front and center on their water bill. We need to know where we are. Second, I'll suggest that the district give away 500 flume devices to 50 customers in each of its 9 gravity systems, and the rest to its commercial and institutional customers. We should start tracking their usage trends. After 6 months, the district should begin a series of focus groups with these customers to understand how they're using their water, what they've learned about ways to conserve, and what messages resonate with them. This information would form the basis for a plan to meet a 40% long-term conservation goal. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Ms. Willard, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Loud and
you.
clear.
I'd like to talk about just briefly the topic that Ed Jameson brought up, which was the Measure S repeal. And I'd like actually the board to answer, please, or somebody from the district to answer, please, tonight, why that was pulled from the Finance Committee meeting last week. And maybe more importantly, when it's going to be brought back on a regular board meeting agenda, because I think it's really important as you're moving towards this next round of study that is on the agenda to be financed with over $400,000 of consultant spending, that you make every effort to ensure that all options are on the table. And I don't have a position actually for or against desal, but I think that it is important that the district remove any impediments to considering and timely moving forward with any options that make sense for improving our water supply. Secondly, I will just repeat the message that I delivered the last time, which is that I continue to be very concerned about the effort being made to push forward with AMI, which is to say real-time monitoring of people's water use. And I think that the key there is that it should not be a mandatory thing that's imposed district-wide, because if it is, there is really no way to ensure that at a future time this will be not used for monitoring, policing, and fining people for violations of your water policy. And I think that will be exceptionally unpopular. So I hope that you will give some serious thought to how to treat this issue and be sensitive to the fact that your ratepayers are not looking for you to be a policing agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Willard. And Mr. Peter Anderson, please.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I think you're in a very difficult balancing act. All of you commissioners, you are asked to be the steward of our most precious resource, water, and you are asked to sell that resource. Are these two missions, one sacred and the other utilitarian, compatible in a time of widespread and deepening drought? Average global temperatures are on track to rise by nearly 2.5 degrees Celsius or 4.5 degrees Fahrenheit in the next few decades. Is this going to be a wet year or a dry year? With rapid global warming, all bets are off. As we enter what many climatologists are calling a mega drought, the longest period of heat and dryness experienced in 1,200 years. In light of these harsh realities, is this the time to be easing up in water conservation? Is this the time to cut back on providing recycled wastewater to the public? Dr. Peter Gleich of the Pacific Institute, an internationally recognized research institute that focuses on California water issues, says that the standard set by the California State Water Board, if you have 3 years of reliable supply, you're okay, is a weak standard. It's an incomplete measure of how we're doing. It goes on to say that as long as water agencies depend on selling water, there is a fundamental conflict of interest between their need to fund their operations, fixed costs, and the state's need to require water conservation as sources are depleted. He offers solutions. He says we need to be massively expanding wastewater treatment and reuse. It's not just about hard infrastructure and costly supply lines. It's about demand and community participation. He says we're shifting the focus to new sources, new supplies like treated wastewater and rainwater catchment to scale. The challenge is how to make this happen faster and with less pain than following the old traditional approach will produce. What can MMWD do? We're probably in a permanent drought. Let's act accordingly. Let's support rainwater catchment and gray water systems and the reuse of treated wastewater as if it is urgent. Tucson, Arizona offers significant rebates. In several states in Australia, rainwater catchment is required by law. Let's spread the word. Let's make it easier for plumbers, landscape contractors, and others to install these systems. They are the pioneers. We need them, and they need our support as they do groundbreaking work across the country. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Okay, thank you very much. Now it's time for a director and general manager's announcements and committee reports.
I have one thing, just to let everybody know that Friday at 9:30, we're having a North Bay Watershed Association meeting. And the primary speaker on Friday will be a lady from the Coastal Conservancy that's been working with the Bay Group on Highway 37. And we're going to get an update and report on what's going on with Highway 37. Okay.
Thank you, Jack.
Yep.
Do we have a, go ahead.
We had a finance committee meeting this week, and our finances are in relatively good shape. We knew, to the last speaker's point, we know that there was some revenue decline as a result of the drought and conservation. At the same time, our plan to use our reserves for exactly this purpose has worked remarkably well. We now, of course, need to replenish those, and we need to plan, we need to move forward with that. But it was great to hear that advanced planning has, really worked as intended. There's also going to be I guess it's every 10 years or so that they look at the boundaries, and we'll be having hearings on the division boundaries coming up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Larry?
Yeah, I think we had the technical advisory committee meeting, which is the meeting of all the Lagunitas stakeholders in the last month since I last reported. That was a virtual tour of the habitat restoration areas out on Lower Lagunitas Creek below Peters Dam. Very informative, a lot of different points of view from various land managers, state parks, et cetera. So it was very similar to the inspection that Monty Schmidt and I did a few weeks ago. But it was good to get the input from the other groups. The other thing I was just going to mention was on Saturday, I went out to Liberty Gulch Trail. There was a trail building project out there. And I wanted to thank Max and Jake, who were two of the staff that were there that were excellent. And the little group of volunteers ended up putting the decking on one of these bridges they're multi-use bridges. And it's really a really nice piece of work and a lot of good energy in that, and very difficult to haul in concrete to these remote areas. So it was really kind of reassuring and a really good thing. And there's going to be a few other of those events. And I also want to thank Tom Boss from MCBC for getting it all organized, but it's really, really good work. And I would recommend anybody to go out there and take a look. It's a beautiful trail. So good work.
Thanks for the update. Monty? Monty?
Nothing to report.
Okay, and I have nothing. Okay, thank you all. Ben?
I don't have any comments tonight, President Russell.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'd like a motion to approve the consent calendar.
Move approval of the consent calendar.
I have a question before we approve, President Russell.
Okay,
On item 4, on the pipeline extension agreement on Marydale, there's no specific mention in the pipeline agreement of the requirement to dual plumb the units with recycled water. And I know it's sort of obliquely mentioned in one of the recitals, but it's completely missing from section 35 on conservation. So I would suggest that that specific requirement be added to the pipeline agreement before we approve it.
We can certainly take care of that request, Director Bragman. We could add language regarding that requirement in section 35 of the proposed pipeline agreement. And I think we would just insert after it starts the paragraph, applicant shall install high efficiency toilets not to exceed 1.28 gallons per flush, which shall be served by recycled water services. And I just want to point out that we have other mechanisms by which we can enforce that, and we'll be making sure that that happens.
So yeah, I think it should be added to the agreement because sometimes the entitlement can be sold to a new owner. So it's better to have everything in one place, in my opinion, just in order to enforce. So if the board is agreeable, I would move that we amend or add that language to that agreement.
I'm in favor of it. Sounds good to me.
Sounds great to me too. Shall we remove it from the consent calendar?
I think if everybody is comfortable with the request, we can just construe the item on the consent calendar to include that modification,
Okay.
As amended.
unless there's an objection.
Do you think we need public comment on that, Molly?
Well, we would need to take public comment and any item on the consent calendar that a member of the public would want to comment on. So if they want to comment on this, they certainly would be welcome.
What I meant was because we were changing it and it isn't as stated in the text. Do we need anything special?
I don't think we need to do anything different than what we
Okay.
otherwise allow.
Okay,
Yeah, and just for the public's understanding, it's not being added now. It already was a condition precedent. But what it does is it just puts it into the contract as a contractual obligation. So it's a much more sort of concise way to handle.
And I just want to point out that we would also want to call out that it would be consistent with the state regulations.
Yes.
and
That's required.
speaking of the state regulations, do we get anywhere with our request to Title 22, the Health Department or Regional Board about the use of reclaimed water inside of single families?
Well, I believe President Russell that that item is a report item later on the agenda. So we'll have an
Okay.
opportunity to delve into
Okay,
that.
perfect. Okay. Any other comments about the proposed amendments to item 4? Okay, then let's go ahead and call for public comment. Is there any public comment, Terry?
There are none.
Okay, then with that and with the modifications made, I would propose we needed a motion to move forward.
I'd move approval with the amendment.
Second,
Roll call.
Director Bragman,
Aye.
Director Gibson,
aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Okay, thank you all. Next, we have a water supply update.
Good evening, Board. Paul Sellier, Operations Director with the Water Supply Update this evening. We have a relatively brief presentation, hopefully mostly good news at this point on our current water supply and a look ahead at what our projected lake storage levels will be. We will look at our precipitation outlook, which may be not quite so good news. And then we'll just wrap up with a quick summary. I know we have a lot to get through tonight. This is our cumulative precipitation chart where 2022 is shown here in the gray. And as you can see, we're well above average and certainly way better off than we were last year and even in 2019, 2020. So that's good news. Good news continues with reservoir storage levels today. We're 95% of capacity, and again above average and above where we were in 2019, 20, and certainly a lot more comfortable than we were in this time last year. As we then look toward the future and reservoir storage projections, you can see that the black line representing where we have been and where we are in terms of today. And you'll note that the projection line shown here, the gray dashed line, this is where we would be if there's no more rain at all. So this star represents where we would be at the end of the water year. And then the orange line is 25% of average and 50% of average, and the green line being average. You'll note that under any of these scenarios, we're not anywhere near any of our shortage contingency planning triggers. And we're going to wrap up, even if there was no more rain, we would look to wrap the end of the water year up right around our average storage levels, maybe a hair below. In the high 50s, thousands of acre feet on October 1st of this year. Moving into the precipitation outlook, NOAA is telling us in the next 8 to 14 day period of time that we are going to be below normal. And in fact, if you go to your favorite weather app for the 10-day forecast, indeed, there is no rain forecasted at all. So to mid-February, we can expect dry conditions. As we look out further to the end of February, there is some chance mid-February that indications that maybe there's a change in the pattern. But at this point, it's just indications. And NOAA are reporting there's equal chance of either above or below normal precipitations. It's really not much help, and it's a good thing we're not buying stocks off of this advice. But it just reflects the uncertainties in predicting the weather that still kind of make our jobs as water planners a little more challenging. So summary then, very quickly, mostly good news, right? Cumulative precipitation is above average, even though really it's been a very dry January. The reservoir storage levels continue, they're above average again. The precipitation forecast for the next couple of weeks looks very dry. Overall though, for the water year, we expect, even with no further rain, to really end the water year in pretty good shape, right around average. So the early rains have really done us, put us in a nice position and set us up for the tasks that we have ahead and that you'll hear more about this evening. So that ends the presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
So Paul, I think we're all on the same page that, it's great that it rained a little bit, but I think it's clear that given the lack of rain in February, we're still in a challenging situation. So I think it's, I realize we're going to talk about this later on the agenda, but I'm uncomfortable with any suggestion that the drought's over and we can go back. I mean, we really do need, it seems to me, to be proceeding full steam ahead, as I think a couple of the speakers today said, with with our redoubling on our conservation efforts to make sure that we are moving to a more permanent reduction in demand, as well as with our water supply, augmentation analyses. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're really taking away from this presentation.
Yeah, I think you make excellent points. And I think we'll hear certainly more about Carrie's presentation, if not tonight, then later. I think there's a water use efficiency communications committee meeting coming up where we'll be talking about just those things, where really we're moving away from, I think, drought actions, or at least should the board choose to move away from sort of short-term drought actions taking what we've learned during that time and applying it to, as you say, to an ongoing long-term conservation way of life, really. That's where I think, what I take away from this. I don't mean to suggest the drought is over and we just go back to life as before, but we've learned lessons and we need to apply those.
Well, I have to say, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think there has been some confusion. I received a lot of correspondence from people very upset and concerned and alarmed that we are saying that the drought is over and we can go back to normal. And I don't believe that is our position, but it's very helpful to have you confirm that.
I mean, I think this is it's a very, again, complicated point that we have near full reservoirs, after such a dry stretch, and yet the rest of the state's not looking good. And we haven't seen rain in a month. And, it makes us all nervous. And it's a very complicated set of facts that we haven't gotten any rain, but yet we have near full reservoirs. And that is climate change. That is the very type of hydrology that we will have to deal with on into the future. And I think it's just extremely important that we do get a very strong message out to our communities that we are not going back to what was a previous way of looking at things. We see our future needing to address the kind of uncertainty that we've got, and we are. And that's the basis of our planning. It's the basis of the things that we're saying here tonight. We have talked about developing a resolution that clearly identifies that we see ourselves as being in an ongoing water supply reliability emergency, where we do need to develop additional water resources to be able to meet demand and need into the future. So these are all things that we've been saying, and I hope that it is getting out there, but it bears worth repeating.
Paul, are we still restricting the habitat flow under the TUCP?
No. January 1st, we began normal releases. We're in by all accounts, we've received adequate rainfall to be classified as a normal year at this point.
Right, and just to add that the temporary urgency change petition and the change order were based on dry year changes. So once we reached the normal year, we began operating as we would under Order 9517.
And Paul, do you know off the top of your head, in a normal year, how much water we're releasing for habitat?
It varies, obviously varies based on how much rainfall we get, but I would say between 11 and 13,000 acre feet, kind of round numbers.
So almost about half of what our residents are using. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
You're on mute.
Oh, that's why. Any public comment?
Yes, there are two. Paul Duder, then Phil Sauter. Mr. Duder, please.
Hi, I was just wondering about reservoir capacity. I noticed the numbers that we report are kind of the original numbers when our reservoirs were first built. But there must be some siltation on our reservoirs, right? Some of our reservoirs are over 100 years old. Some are like 50 years old. Do we have any idea of how much siltation we have in our reservoirs and what our actual current capacity is?
President Russell, I can answer that if you'd like. Okay. So we have done some bathymetry studies on the reservoirs, and you'll notice in most of our water supply planning charts, you'll see a band at the bottom of 10,000 acre feet, which is really denoting we're not sure what's really available down there. So that's how we tend to think about it when we're planning. The bathymetry data, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think there was some, it's a lot less than you might think in terms of the total effect on reservoir volumes. I maybe a couple thousand acre feet total across all 7 reservoirs.
Should we be giving those numbers as our capacity? If, you know, if we have siltation in the reservoirs, then perhaps we should give the actual capacity instead of, you know, the original capacity.
Yeah,
I think
go ahead, Director Bregman.
I was just going to say, this comes up fairly frequently, and I think we do post the telemetry LiDAR study results as our reservoir capacity. So I think they've been updated effectively.
Yeah, I actually have the data here. We reported to the board in 2018, the Bathymetric survey results. There was a 1.5% decrease in total storage volume. We lost about 1,000 acre feet since the last study.
Yeah. So, but I mean, as far as our assumptions, I think hopefully our assumptions are based on the new data.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Duder. Mr. Sauter, please.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I think we all believe it makes sense to look at long-term conservation as a crucial leg of our water supply resiliency goal. A friend pointed me to Director Schmidt's recent article in the IJ, and I was glad to see his focus on extending our water supply from a very risky 2.5 years where it is now. I looked at the effects of long-term conservation goal of 40%, leading to a reduction of 30 gallons per capita per day. In addition to being within the upcoming state standards, it would mean a reduction of 5.7 million gallons per day. Instead of 24 million gallons a day, give or take, we'd be producing 18 million gallons a day. And hold on to your hats, I know that's a big number. But instead of drawing down our reservoirs by 8.8 billion gallons a year, we'd be drawing them down by 6.6 billion gallons a year. If my math is correct, that would add an extra 12 months to our storage supply. A 1-year increase in storage capacity would go a long way toward easing our jitters during long periods of drought. It would mean that we could be far less reactive to weather events. We could avoid having to give customers a series of stop and go messages, and we wouldn't have to reduce or delay water releases for other species who are an important part of our watershed. And all of these savings would be before we start looking at our commercial customers. I think there are 3 other nice things about conservation. One is that we don't run the risk of bringing in a new water supply only to be told by the state that we're already violating usage standards and getting the stink eye for bringing in more water. A second is that we won't be relying on another water supplier who may run into shortage problems of its own and cut us off. And third, conservation doesn't require much new physical infrastructure, and it's easier on our existing infrastructure. Of course, none of this is to say that conservation is free money. It will require its own form of investment in making it easier for customers to modify long-term behaviors. In fact, one fantasy is that we could hand out flume devices to all 60,000 district customers and make us the best informed water district in the country. A program like that could cost millions of dollars, but grants and state money may be available. I expect we'll find that conservation will have a very favorable return on investment, and I hope we can elevate conservation to the same level as other water supply initiatives. So in the future, I'm hoping that we talk about intertie and we talk about desal and we talk about other ways of getting water into the system, that we elevate conservation to be one of the things that we talk about on a regular basis, and that it show up as an agenda item in future board meetings on a more regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Can I just ask Larry, before we move on, I just want to comment quickly on Mr. Sauter's comment about flume devices. It's come up a couple of times, and I don't know if it's going to be part of tonight's presentation, but we're already doing rebates for flume, and I'm grateful that we are, but I have to say I concur. I've worked with flume in my non-board life, and it is it's just a great product and a great company. And I think now that we're hearing from a lot of people who have taken advantage of those rebates, that we may really want to be thinking about expanding. Maybe not exactly along the lines that have been proposed. That might be a little ideal, but I think it's really worth talking more about this now that we've got some of that data. So I don't know if that's something we can talk about in an upcoming item, but if not, then we should agendize it soon.
We have two more, Rick Adler, then James Krajewski. Mr. Adler, please.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to suggest that we need a re-education project because so many of the people think that the drought is over. Only about half of the population pays much attention to this stuff. Most people are not as concerned or interested as the board, the staff, and we few who call in. Most people are too tired and too busy, too young, too old, too something. They just don't pay any attention to this stuff. And they think that the reservoirs are full, the drought's over, back to, we don't have to pay any more attention if they think about it at all. So we need a massive education project. And one thing I would suggest, maybe we can go through the schools and get the kids to have contests on how to save water, how to conserve water, take that back home to their parents and work on it through that. That might be one way, but somehow got to overcome this theory that a lot of people have that the drought's over. And also a lot of the people that use the water here in Marin aren't from Marin. They're coming here to work and they go home and they don't have that much interest in saving Marin water. So I don't know exactly how to solve this problem, but it's kind of like with the pandemic. A lot of people are just tired of the pandemic and they're just not paying any attention anymore. They're doing risky behavior. And same with the water. People are just tired of drought and conserving water and hearing about it. And so they're just going back to the old ways if they had any conservation in them at all. So I don't have any solution, but got to do something to re-educate the public that we're in a long-term drought, like forever. We got to change our ways of behaving. Thank you much.
Thank you, Mr. Adler. Mr. Krajewski, please.
Thank you. One of the issues with these discussions on conservation and how much water supply we need is that there seldom is a discussion of what is the end point. What is the vision, for example, of what Marin should look like if we put in all these conservation measures? And another thing is what is the vision that the public has of what they would like water to be used for? So do you want water to be used for apple trees in Marin or not? Are lawns completely out or not? And so if you don't have a vision of the end point of conservation for Marin, it's hard to figure out how much the water supply should be. I mean, we've said, it's interesting that it comes up only now that the water supply should be 3 years or possibly 4 years, where has that figure been for the last several years? Now it's coming up. So I think we need to talk about how much conservation is enough so we know what the end point is in order to figure out what our water supply should be. Without that, you don't know what the water supply should be, and you have to factor in what does the public want about this, because the district is it a utility to supply water or is it a conservation district? And I don't know, maybe it's both. I don't know what the answer to that is, but I think we need to get the public involved in how much conservation is enough and how much conservation is too much. Thank you.
Interesting question. Thank you. Okay, with that, let's move on to item 8, Castanya Pump Station Rehabilitation.
On mute, Terry.
Sorry about that. Yes, Ed, had one more comment, sir. Director Russell?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, loud and
Yes.
clear.
Go ahead, sir.
Just to focus these conservation discussions, it would be very helpful if the district put a one-page slide together that just showed what the facts are. They're really pretty simple. 87 gallons a day, give or take a gallon total for residential single-family use. The district thinks that includes about 40 gallons a day for indoor use. The flume devices say 37, which is 20% below the next of the largest 17 counties in California. Our performance on flume is without peer, and we're using 47 gallons out of the 87 for irrigation use. But conflating 55 gallon standards in California and suggesting that that's a total like our 87 it's beyond confusing, it's misleading, and it needs to be stopped. So let's talk about the California standard of 55 gallons being for indoor use. Try to make clear that people like San Francisco use very little water because they're living in high rises. These are very brief facts that can be put on one page. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no further comments.
Cool. Alrighty, let's move on to item 8, Castanya Pump Station Rehabilitation. Hello.
Is that Crystal?
I don't know. I can look.
Yes,
Sorry about
it's,
that. I was
There
having
you go.
technical difficulties. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and Mark Cazaret is going to start off the presentation on Castania.
Okay.
Everybody see that?
yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Crystal. Good evening, everyone. Mark Cazaret, Engineering Manager for Construction. I'm here with the Director of Engineering, Crystal Yesman, and we will be providing an update to the Castania Pump Station Rehabilitation Project. And as well, we'll be speaking of to the hydraulic and operational benefits that the pump station will provide. So next slide, please. Okay, great. So
Go back. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry. So yes, we'll discuss the construction update. We'll go over the hydraulic and operational benefits that the pump station is now going to provide to the district, and we'll provide next steps. The image on the right is the Castania pump station. It's bordered by Highway 101 to the east and Castania Road to the west. It's located in southern Petaluma. Next slide, please. Okay, and on to the construction update. So this slide essentially shows just how quickly the district and partners worked to complete this project. This project required extensive effort in hydraulic modeling, condition assessments, pre-design and design efforts. It also required interagency collaboration with our partners at Sonoma Water Agency in North Marin. And a project of this complexity would require a 2 to 3 year delivery schedule. And really what this shows is we can accomplish this project in less than 1 year. We began the project February 2021 with a board approval for pre-design and the hydraulics analysis. We spent about 9 months through pre-design and design. And on November 2nd, we awarded the construction contract. Construction just took about 2.5 months. And as of just last week, the pump station is now operational. And so really what we're trying to demonstrate here is that we successfully compressed a pretty complex project, a longer delivery schedule in just about a year to ensure that we would have the pump station in operation when we needed it. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you can see, the construction status, we're about 95% complete. Only minor punch list items remain. And some of the key construction accomplishments included the 30-inch hot tap of the North Marin Aqueduct, pipeline testing, disinfection, as well as the tie-in to the aqueduct, and functional testing performed by our marine water operations staff. And so, yes, just last week, we successfully operated one pump at its maximum flow rate. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll be sharing a few photos now, starting with on the left, the fabrication of the 30-inch welded steel discharge piping. On the right is the final tie-in to the North Marin Aqueduct. This photo was taken at about 5 o'clock in the morning. It was quite a long day. Slide, please. We completed final paving as well as final site grading and stabilization to ensure no erosion and sediment runoff would occur. And next slide. And of course, the most recent work performed by Marin Water's operations staff to rehabilitate and test the electrical and mechanical equipment inside the pump station itself. And they did an exceptional job doing this work. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll be handing it off to Crystal to discuss, most importantly, the hydraulic improvements and the operational flexibility that the Castania pump station is going to afford the district. Thank you.
Crystal, do you want to take questions now on that, or you want to wait?
Why don't we wait? We've got some
Okay.
exciting news to present
Okay.
to the board here. All right, so I'm going to take it from here. I just want to thank Mark. He's one of our newest engineering managers for construction. He's been here less than 6 months and he's done an excellent job. We really threw him into this project when he first came on board and he's cut his teeth on it. I also want to thank Steve Underwood, our construction inspector on the project, working late nights and through torrential rains to get this project complete. But what's really exciting is the hydraulic improvements that we've been able to garner from this project. So I'm going to go into a little detail on that. So you've seen this presentation before, but I just want to go through it again. The new condition of Castania allows us to pump up to 1.5 MGD through the pump station. Prior to that, if you look at a snapshot in time from spring of 2021, with North Marin demands of 11 MGD at that time, the gravity flow of without Castania only allowed us to pull 4 MGD. So we were only able to pull about 15 MGD through gravity. Now with Castania in the winter conditions with low demand, we can pull it in up to 10.5 MGD into our system. The limiting factor is actually our system. When we have low demand in our system, it's hard for us to move the water from the north to the south, and because we have some bottlenecks that prevent us from doing that. Now I'll go into a little more detail on those bottlenecks and how we're going to try to eliminate those in the future. But ultimately, during low demand situations, we can bring in an additional 6.5 MGD. Now in the summer, when demands are really high, we can go up to the 21.5, but this is just a snapshot to show you the benefit, the hydraulic benefit of having Castania in service. So in other words, what this means is that with that 10 to 11 MGD during these low flow demand conditions, we can bring in 12,500 acre feet of water in a year if you were to average that over every day. Our contractual allotment is 14,300. Now we're looking at some system improvements within our system to be able to move water from the north to the south, eliminate some bottleneck. Winter, we can get it all the way down to Mill Valley and Sausalito. We would like to move an additional 1.6 MGD, and we'll talk about that a little bit further. Essentially, we'll have a presentation next week project where we're going to quickly, hopefully eliminate that down to just 0.2 MGD limitation in the winter. But we have some other ideas in the works. That's part of our, what we call our transmission system improvement project. It's called TSIP. It was something that we began a couple months ago when we were entering the drought to look at bottlenecks in our system. We'll talk about this in more detail next week at our water supply committee, but how we're going to increase that so that we can take in our whole contractual allotment. Now, of course, in the summer, when we have high demands, we can bring in the 21 MGD, so we'll be okay. We can reach our whole contractual allotment now with Castania. But going on, let me tell you what this means to us. So our current drought that we just experienced over the last year, if we were able to use Castania pump station and bring in that extra 6.5 MGD every day, we would bring in that 12,500 acre feet in a year. And if we take that over 30 months of the drought, if we had brought in an additional 15,000 acre feet with Castania in service, we would have only dropped our reservoir levels to about 40,000 acre feet. And as you can see, during our recent drought, we dropped well below 30,000. So it pushed us into, extreme drought actions with the board, triggers and mandatory conservation measures. So the fact that we got Castanya back in service is huge. I mean, this is really improving our ability to manage our water supply during drought, especially multi-year droughts. Now, let me show you what that looks like on a historical drought from the 80s. So back in the 80s, from 1986 to 92, we had a drought. And this is what our water supply looked like through that time period. Had we had Castanya running at a full pump station capacity, we would have brought in that additional 12,500 acre feet, per year, that total 12,500. And the water supply in our reservoirs would have stayed up at this dotted line. In the drought of the 1986-92, we would have never reached any of these drought triggers during that particular event. So basically, the shift now that we're going to do with Castanya being back in service is it allows us to practice what we call front loading to maximize the imported water at the beginning of our water year, so that ultimately we can bring full allotment so if it becomes dry that following year, we can bring in the full water allotment of 14,300 acre feet. And this really is just measurably, I can't emphasize anymore how much it improves our drought resiliency. It also provides greater independence from North Marin's use of the aqueduct. Before, when they were pulling their full allotment limited, and now we can pull in much more water while they're pulling in their full allotment. It also provides additional water during peak demand periods, so we can bring in that 21.5 MGD and hopefully, and meet our peak demands. Let's talk about costs. So it's just amazing. This project at $1.6 million amounted to an addition of 6,300 acre feet a year that we think we can in. Before we were bringing in, 8,000 acre feet a year at most, but our contractual allotment of 14,300, now we can add that on and meet that contractual allotment, actually bring in the water that we're contractually allowed to bring in. And the cost was a mere $254 per acre foot in terms of capital investment. That's huge. The unit cost for this project is far lower than any other water supply option that's out there. I mean, to bring in new water supplies could cost between $2,000 to $10,000 an foot for the capital investment for new reservoir or recycled water. And so I just want, I'm really happy this project was such a great success for us, and really shows that, how we were thinking outside of the box during this drought in order to maximize our resiliency for future droughts. And so the fact that we were to get this project constructed in such a short time period and provide such benefit to the district is huge. So I just wanted to emphasize that, but that's it for the presentation. I'm going to go ahead and talk about next steps here. So now that we've got that completed, we're continuing our efforts to towards drought and climate change resiliency. We're pursuing additional system improvements within our system so that in the winter when demands are low, we can move the water around in our system, and we'll talk about that more at future meetings. And then of course, tonight we've got an item on the agenda for a full environmental review of the East Bay intertie project. It was the emergency intertie project. We're keeping the same acronym EIP, but it's East Bay intertie project now. And then we'll also be talking tonight about the strategic water supply assessment that we're hoping to launch to evaluate long-term solutions to drought and climate change in Marin. All right, so with that concludes the presentation. All right, Larry, you have some questions for us?
Yeah, I got a ton of them.
Okay, good.
They're not quite in the same order they were, but I'll start off with this one.
Okay.
Was the water available? Would the water have been available in the 80s? You projected the flow. Could we have bought the water?
Yeah, I think that's a question for Paul. He attends the WAC meetings and is more familiar with the Sonoma County Water Agency's capacity constraints. So would the water have been available to bring into our district in the 80s? I don't think the contracts have changed much in that time period in terms of our minimal take, but he could correct.
I wasn't so much concerned about the contract as about the position of Sonoma Water during that time.
In terms of curtailments, yes. So, yeah. So now that we can bring in water prior to a potential drought, we could possibly get a head start on importing our contractual allotment prior to curtailments, which would happen more in the summer. Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, that would be ideal if we get that front loading is what that's premised on. To answer the question, I don't have that information, President Russell. I can find out for you what the story
Yeah,
is for
I'm
the-
just curious, Paul. It's not important particularly.
Yeah, just recognizing, yeah, right. Lake Sonoma was constructed in the 80s, I think. So
Right. So it's more complicated.
We're kind of just thinking about the hydrology of that period.
Oh yeah. No, that's cool.
Yeah.
No, it's a really interesting graph. I liked it a lot. In the bigger picture, I think we should give some very hard thought, Ben and the gang, to lessons to be learned by approaching a project this way. I mean, it's a little unusual to have this mothballed, unused pump station sitting aside. And to that end, and you may not want to answer this, and I understand that, it would have been a lot easier, this project, if they had just bypassed the pump station instead of taking it out of service. And I wonder if, I would have guessed that most of the work that was done wouldn't have been necessary. Maybe the taps would have been necessary, but they could have basically left the thing ready to go with the pipelines they had, it seems to me. And then I got a whole series of them here, but I'll get two more that I'll stop. I think you answered this one. The flow rate achieved with the pump on was something like 12.5 MGD or something like that.
No, we were at
right?
21.5 MGD. We
21.
actually tested it last week into the system. So it's very exciting.
Okay.
Yeah.
And where did the water go?
We dropped the tank levels in North Marin's system so that it could take on the water. Yeah.
I see. So you had a home for it.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because it's kind of like running at steady state, and all of a sudden you throw in an extra 10 MGD. It's got to go
Yeah,
somewhere.
we hope to run this pump station continuously coming this spring when the demands pick up, later this spring. But this was a test, so we dropped the tank levels for a day or two.
And do we get our power there from Marin Clean Energy? Is it that one's paid that way, or is it different?
Good question. We are finalizing the deed transfer as I speak, and we hope to have that recorded with the Santa Rosa County, Sonoma County clerk soon. And then once we have complete ownership, we are going to transfer the power, and we will be selecting the green clean energy option from
Good.
I think
So getting back to my first two questions, one second, Larry, about lessons to learn, and should the pump station have just been bypassed rather than abandoned? Are we going to take a bite of that apple, or we're not going to bite it?
I think it's a very complicated, multi-jurisdictional history, and Caltrans was involved in a whole lot of things. So, I don't think we're prepared tonight to get into that.
Okay, well, let's get prepared, because I'd like to know the answer, especially for the future, the way we approach things. This is pretty unique, and it may not be representative of anything else, but how about lessons to learn?
Maybe.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I think there are lessons to be learned for sure.
Yeah, I'm talking about Mark's comments at the beginning, and I'd like to compliment everybody on an excellent job done in extremely fast time, and especially our friends, the contractor who built it. Hard work, the rain, and all those things. I think it's a project that we should make a significant press release on, telling people where we are and what's going on, because I think it's really cool. And as I've said to you, Ben, had this been envisioned at the time when I joined the board and the desal study was going on, there would have been no need to do the desal study.
Yeah.
Assuming the water's available from Sonoma Water.
Yeah. I want to second that point about the congratulations. This is a big deal. I mean, you guys have hit a home run here, and thank you very much to you, Crystal, and everybody involved in this, Mark, and the whole crew. This is the people are out there clamoring for us to increase our water supply. We just did that, and we did it in a reasonably short time frame, and at given the cost of water today, a very low cost. I mean, it's it's a home run. No two other ways to look at it. That's exactly what it is. And I think we should promote it to the public with exactly that level of excitement, quite frankly. Yeah.
I agree, Jack, completely.
Yeah. And,
I
and the
agree
other
as well.
thing,
I think it's really important to heap praise on the team, on Crystal and your team for this. I mean, it's well done. I know it's been in the works for a while, and I'm glad we were able to get it done in such a great way, and it's such a low cost to the ratepayers. It's fantastic.
And to our
showing
general
it.
manager,
Yeah.
it was Ben's idea as far as I can follow. So.
And I think
Good.
showing, that the data that Crystal that you just provided about what that difference would mean, and looking at a historical drought is the kind of information that I mean the public can't really understand, I think, as easily when we throw around MGDs and other things like that. But showing what this would have meant and what it could mean to a future series of dry years is the kind of information that folks really do need to understand. So big kudos to everybody who worked on this project.
okay. So I agree with the praise and commendation. I mean, it really epitomizes public service, excellence in public service, to bring it in on budget, in time, under those conditions. And the other thing, so really thank you, Crystal and Mark. I mean, it's just really, really impressive. But I just wanted to add, it also demonstrates different agencies working together to get it done instead of working against each other. I mean, this was really mutual aid at its finest, and it's really going to deliver benefits to the people of Marin. And so I just think, to me, it's a demonstration of public good and municipal work, and really, really high standard of public service. So thank you all.
And also, Larry, excellent engineering. When I was at Berkeley, I was taught that engineering is doing the most with the least.
Yeah.
And this is an absolute definition of that kind of a project.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah. At our every month at our North Bay Watershed meeting, which is, as I said, is Friday, one of the things we do, it's a great example of regionalism in our area with all the different agencies involved. One of the things we do is we go around and talk about what's going on at each of the agencies. So obviously you've just given me something that I'm going to tout and of course take full credit for. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you all. How about public comment?
I do not see any public comments.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'll keep talking it up. They'll be in next time. Okay, thank you all. Item 10 is next, or item 9, which am I? Item 9, sorry.
Good evening, Board of Directors. Lucy Croy, Water Quality Manager. I'm going to pull up my screen. Let's see. Okay. Good evening. Tonight we have a presentation overview for the Strategic Water Supply Assessment, a project that you've heard of a bit in the past few board meetings and committee meetings. That's focused over the next 5 or 6 meetings, 5 or 6 months, developing a strategic roadmap for water supply resiliency and implementation. So we'll start off tonight first with a step back, looking at a bit of background for the project and noting the objectives that we expect to come out of this project around June, July timeframe. We'll walk through the project elements at a high level and the major milestones for the project, and then finish up with the recommendation that is for the board's consideration tonight, as well as next steps for this project, as well as a few other water supply resiliency initiatives that are underway right now. So as you all are more than well aware, the work over the last year has been very rapid. in response to the drought emergency. And really with the rain that we received in October and December that far exceeded what we expected, we fortunately are no longer in a crisis. So with reservoir levels that have been dramatically improved, we can now kind of take a step back and reflect on the extreme dry cycles that we've seen and we've experienced, increasingly so over the last decade. And also benefiting from many of the studies and initiatives the district has undertaken over the past few years. We've heard from the board the commitment to improving water supply resiliency and address these accelerated climate change impacts that we're seeing right here and right now. So specifically, the board has directed staff to pursue a strategic water supply assessment. And really what we expect to come out of this are short-term and long-term solutions that will be implemented for the district's water supply resiliency needs that are identified. This roadmap will be largely built on many of the studies that have been underway for the past few years. And it will also incorporate a few new options, such as taking surplus water from Sonoma County during the winter months. The water supply initiatives that we'll take a look at, the alternatives, they'll be evaluated looking at our resiliency right now and taking into consideration drought scenarios that we've seen historically and that we can likely see in the future, and developing a roadmap for implementation and where to go from here. So a key driver, as I've mentioned, for this roadmap is the accelerated pace of climate change impacts that we're seeing locally, as well as across the US and globally, of course. On the right, you'll see here is a chart showing, just for the Bay Area even, some of the dramatic shift in average temperatures in just the Bay Area, trending towards a much hotter temperatures just even in the last 10 years. Pardon my cat. As soon as I start presenting, I have a friend. And how this impacts water supply is really that, with droughts and with these rapid changes with climate change, we can expect more frequent and more severe droughts in the future. So this is why we are undertaking this roadmap at this time and really building on the work that's been done by the district previously. So we did have the opportunity to meet with operations ad hoc on Friday and go into a bit more detail on the scope of work and get some feedback. And the first foundational element of the of this project of the water supply, the strategic water supply assessment is really confirming the overall strategy and approach. And then second, building on that is really reviewing the previous studies that I've mentioned, making sure that all the bases are already covered, and updating the decision model that we already have in place to match what we know about the system. From there, we'll develop a few extended drought scenarios, both that we've seen and also more extreme ones to really test the system. And then from there, we'll really compile all those alternatives that many of you have already seen. So the intertie to the East Bay, take the Sonoma options that we've talked about, as well as some new options, desalination and expansion of local storage for consideration, really making sure that we cover all our bases, as well as recycled water, so water reuse, and making sure that we look at the feasibility studies that were done just in the last 5 to 7 years. And what this culminates in is really an evaluation of those alternatives under the drought scenarios that we talked about. So testing those alternatives under extreme stress tests, and that's what's really going to form this roadmap for implementation. So as I mentioned, the project schedule is pretty accelerated, largely because we have so much work that's already been done on many of these initiatives. So we're looking at about 5 to 6 month project schedule with some of the foundational tasks up front in February and March. So, looking back through historical documents, making sure everything aligns. And then really in April and May is where we start to compile and look at all the water supply alternatives. And then May and June is probably the largest piece of the project, the task where we really evaluate these alternatives under the drought scenarios. And you'll notice that at the top, there's also kind of a marker for public workshops. Right now, we don't know exactly when those will take place, but we do know that that will be a core component of the project, engaging with our public constituents about the water supply project and really getting their feedback and informing them the whole way through the project. So where we expect this roadmap to go is really to support the district's near-term and long-term investments for water supply and drought resiliency. And that's really through developing a roadmap that will lay out the best opportunities to pursue and what the timing is for those opportunities. And as I mentioned, we know that public engagement is a core component of this project. And we expect that we will continue to not only have these workshops specifically with the public similar to the drought webinars that we held, but also we'll be coming back to board meetings throughout to provide updates.
Okay,
So
thank you.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
just 2 more. So the recommendation tonight is to authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Jacobs Engineering for the strategic water supply assessment project. And then the next steps, a bit of a combination here. So next week will be the kickoff for the Resiliency Committee on February 8th that Crystal mentioned. And then February 16th is the Communications and Water Efficiency meeting. And throughout February, we do expect that there will be a continuation of the review and discussion on the water supply policy. And then the resiliency workshops that I talked about with the public, those will occur throughout March and June. And we expect that the strategic water supply assessment will culminate in a report and a roadmap come the end of June, early July. So with that, that is the end of my presentation, and I am happy to take any questions.
I just have a comment. I think it's a very good idea. I particularly like the public workshops. Do you have any timetable when we would be ready to be starting those?
We're having quick discussions this week, but we think that we'd have a early workshop probably at the end of February, early March to really start the engagement at the beginning of the project.
I think that's a very good idea and a good part of the project. And I particularly like the fact that it keeps the door open for all of the alternatives we're looking at and keeps us moving forward. So I'm all for it.
Yeah, I just want to echo that, the importance of the public, the importance of this study in across the board. I mean, I know we have done over the years a lot of work looking at alternatives to improve water supply reliability. This isn't the first time that obviously as a district we've looked at these things. A lot of the studies that will be leveraged, why we can do this so quickly, is because we have been looking at these kind of issues for quite some time. The importance, though, of using this time to educate our public. You know, the drought has raised public awareness. There's been a lot of comments, and we get them every board meeting about the need to educate folks. This study is really a great opportunity to do just that, to really help explain, what are the pros and cons around all of our different alternatives. Nothing is probably as straightforward as people wish. And whether it's desal, whether it's a pipeline, whether it's groundwater storage, whether it's raising storage, everything has challenges. And honestly, I hope that this really does serve as an opportunity to educate folks, so that when we come out of this process, we have a really solid basis of information to make decisions about long-term investments that are cost-effective and drought resilient, and that the public is able to come along with that decision-making, being able to see transparently why we're making decisions, because they are cost-effective. This is something that the public really looks to us for, is to be fiscally responsible, but also to provide that water supply reliability. And I think this study enables us to do that. So I'm very encouraged by it. And I think it's really the kind of thing that we need to really make every effort possible to make it open to the public, to be able to have them participate and be brought along, and not just reported out to at the end of the process, but to be engaged along the way.
Okay, Cynthia?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea. I think to the point that was made earlier, I think it's fabulous that it's going to build on the very considerable analysis that has been done to date, hopefully bringing in some new ideas. And I've already received a lot of requests from members of the public to participate. So, very much looking forward to that conversation. So yeah, I'll full steam ahead.
Cool. Larry?
Agree with all the previous comments. I think, we've got to get people out of their silos and really take a look at the whole spectrum of supply options that the district has, and put them all on the table and look at the cost benefit of each, and make a decision as a district and with the public. And certainly this process, this report will be a key to accomplishing that. So very important that we move forward with this, as I think, as quickly as possible. I mean, if we could get it done sooner, I'd love to see that, because we have so many unpredictable variables that are going to affect our decision-making process. It really makes it a much more difficult process to go through. So in that regard, I hope the study encompasses discussions with some of our other agencies. CMSA, I know, hired Carollo to do a recycled water study. Could that recycled water project include reverse osmosis or some other process that could provide either potable or close to potable water that we could ship by pipeline to Phoenix or Bontempi, and really provide a very cost-effective and secure supply. Rerouting Phoenix, which we've discussed. So there's a lot of areas of work that it's going to need to encompass, and the sooner the better. And thank you for bringing it so quickly, in light of the changes that we've gone through here in the last few months.
Actually, can I ask one quick question? Because I'm not sure I caught all of the details in the proposal. Are we going to be looking pretty seriously at or is this assessment going to be looking seriously at DPR? I've had a few people come forward lately with some really interesting figures. I understand that the regulations aren't going to be done by the state until 2023, but it's right around the corner at this point. So
it's really 2024, December 2023.
Okay, but I mean, it's fairly soon. And, so I'm hearing a lot more interest in that as an option. And I hadn't really, I don't know that the board, I should say, have really focused on that in light of, how long it's been taking for those health and safety regs to get put together. But I mean, that's very much in the middle future, I would say. So I don't know who's the right person to speak to that.
I'll speak to it, Director Kohler. And I think it's a really good question, because it does allow me to clarify what we are going to get in this project and what we aren't in terms of board and public expectations. We are moving very, very quickly in a project that typically would go 18 months or longer. We're able to do it, as we talked about, because of all the work we've done over the years. At the same time, the time constraint will limit the level of analysis on certain options. And for example, the intertie, of course, we've done the design. We have really great sense of what it will take, what the risks are, uncertainties, how much water we would get, and those kind of things. So that would most likely be presented in this project with much more granularity than, for example, increasing local storage. Well, where we don't have time to do geotech analysis and really understanding local storage at the level that will have the understanding of the intertie. We're certainly going to look at it at a high level. And then as we move forward with the roadmap, it likely will have activities in parallel. If the local storage looks promising at a very high level, the board may direct staff to continue to look at that as we're pursuing other options. So in DPR, direct potable reuse, will probably fall more in the local storage category in terms of the granularity and the detail than the intertie.
That's totally, I get that. That's fine. I just want to make sure that it's considered as an option, because some of the numbers I'm seeing, I mean, the cost per acre foot has come way down, like very much, not as low as what we were just seeing about Castania, but still far, far lower than some of the other options that have been on the table. So I just want to make sure that at whatever level is appropriate, given the scale, that it's on the table so that the board can determine, whether or not to go to the next step, because it hasn't really risen to the top in the analyses in the past. It hasn't been something management has brought forward in a big way, but I'd like to see something a little bit more detailed in this study.
Absolutely.
I think we all would.
And Ben,
Just remember,
sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Are we also going to be talking to Sonoma about that Petaluma River site, at least a survey, or just getting the information that we have?
Yes.
So under the desalination assessment, we will be looking at, for example, MMWD doing a project of our own at different scales. We'll be looking at regional. We'll be looking as part of regional at Petaluma. But again, likely the granularity of what it would really take to do desal in the Petaluma River in terms of the nature of the soils and the cost, that probably would be a follow-on study directed by the roadmap, however that is ultimately formed.
Yeah, it just, as far as a survey is concerned, it'd just be interesting to get as broad a swath as we can, so the public knows, we know, and we can make a better decision.
Yeah, think of this kind of like an urban water management plan on steroids, because that's kind of what it is, really. It's trying to make it implementable and usable, whereas the urban water management plans are more esoteric in the clouds of pleasing the state to show that you're looking at this stuff.
I'd like to build on that comment, President Russell, and we are thinking about this in context of implementation. This is a roadmap for implementation, not a plan. We aren't just developing a plan. We are looking at this to develop a roadmap for the board to direct staff on the roadmap that is selected for implementation, with the understanding that that roadmap will likely include, depending on the scenarios, more analysis, right? As I was discussing, depending on what rises up.
Yeah, and remember, Cynthia, yes, the DPR is very sexy because it's a guaranteed source, but it has a ways to go yet. I was talking to George Shabanaglis about the issue of temperature, and they sort of skipped over that one because the water's coming in at 10 or 15 degrees warmer than normal or more. And it has a pretty big impact on the usefulness. Plus it warms up in the treatment process. And because of the impacts on public health, this is definitely a measure twice, cut once kind of project. I appreciate your comments, Larry, about speeding things up, but based on the ad hoc meeting on Friday, the consultant is basically up against the wall to get this done in the 5 months that's being allowed. You know, as Ben said, the number they actually threw out was 18 to 24 months to do a study like this normally. And, you know, perhaps the Castanya model is going to work across the board for us to pick up the pace on a lot of things. Just remember that you can get things good, fast, or cheap. Pick any two. So, you know, with the speed comes cost. So, you know, you want it fast and good, it's expensive. And, you know, we have to always keep that in the back of our minds. And the last thing I'll say here is that, you know, good things take time. And there's a certain amount, and not just looping the public in and getting their input, but there's a certain amount of just time to do the engineering thinking that to guarantee there's no mistakes. Because this is something you can't screw up. Okay, I mean, you can screw it up easily, but you're not allowed to, because, you know, we start messing with our water quality. And Ben and I have been talking about this for several years now. But one of the things is that Henry Ongerth, who ran the state health department for about 100 years, Henry, and he ran the recycled water part of it in particular, but Henry had a position that you use the highest quality source for the highest quality needs. And you have to keep that always in the back of your mind. You know, you look for places to use the recycled water that aren't so critical, if you can find them. And, you know, we've done that already with toilet flushing is a perfect example of that. Rather than drinking it, it's much better off to use it for toilet flush, just from a mechanical standpoint. Even if it's perfect quality, suitable for drinking, it's still better to use it for toilet flush. So that's why I'm such a fan of what you're proposing, Larry, for the dual systems. And if we can just get people to realize, if you do it at the beginning, you can always hook it up when the water's available. If it's never available, then it's like the shopping center across from the ferries. It's fully plumbed for dual plumbing, but we've never brought water to it. Never bought recycled water. So there's a lot that's going to be happening here. And I was very pleased with the consultant meeting on Friday with the doc ad hoc. And I'm looking forward to this. I think this is going to be a life in the fast lane for all of us.
Could I just add one other comment?
Absolutely.
CMSA, I was thinking more of indirect reuse.
Sure.
You would take it up to Phoenix or Bontempi, and it would go through water treatment. So I know there's complications and environmental studies that would need to be done, but I think that would be the direction I could see us going here in Marin. So
yeah, that's not exactly IPR, okay, because it's a drinking water source. So that's a little tricky. That one's a kind of a, and one of the problems, Cynthia talked about December 23, the standards coming out, but you know, who in the hell knows what it's going to take to meet the standards? You know, it may be so draconian that no one does this. And last but not least in this discussion is the yuck factor. I started talking about this concept with some of my friends here in Tiburon, and they go, "You mean we could shower with that water?" Uh-huh. And I mean, and this is a woman I have a great deal of respect for her intelligence. And you know, she was backtracking from this just from the concept of the yuck factor. Now, Water Factory 21 and later the new groundwater replenishment program in Orange County have moved through this without a word from the LA Times. They never mentioned toilet to tap. They never mentioned the yuck factor. So, you know, perhaps we can be as successful. I don't know if that's true or not, but we're going to give it a try. But, you know, everything's on the table here for coming up with a successful local water supply.
I appreciate that. I think it's really important to not get too far, to be willing to take that chance. And at this point, it's so early that we shouldn't be discouraged by that. We've seen people address that factor in a lot of ways. And Larry, you certainly know better than most that the technology is certainly there to address whatever the standards are. There's now, developing uniform health standards as a result of a project being initiated that was initiated, years ago now by the San Francisco PUC. But the way that a lot of those public perception issues have been addressed have been through really clever campaigns. We've been involved in some that involve using some of that water in beer. And we have found that if you tell people that they're drinking recycled beer, with the motto being all water is recycled, the reception is actually pretty good. So there's a lot of, we wouldn't be having to plow new ground. There's a lot of communities, and you've mentioned a few, and then there's a number in other states, in Colorado and in other areas that have, very similar climates to ours that are somewhat ahead with this issue.
Sure, and need drives the whole situation. I mean, people don't think about the fact that the total flow of the Mississippi River is used 3 times between its headwaters and the discharge in New Orleans. The total flow.
I think the Colorado it's 17.
Oh, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah, exactly. And, just between Sacramento and Contra Costa Water, there's 32 sewage discharges into the Sacramento River.
Yes.
And, so people don't think about that kind of stuff because they think about towns like Locke and they go, yeah, well, Locke's just there, right? Well, not exactly. It's there's a lot of activity.
Well, this conversation in part should highlight the fortuitousness of our watersheds that deliver really, really beautiful, high quality water to us. So maybe it's worth note of that. But taking us back to the study, I think that this conversation just highlights the many different considerations that we will need to go through in the coming months, and the importance of really leaning on the study and to objectively really consider the different alternatives so that we can make good informed decisions on the back end.
That's a very good comment, Monty. And it also produces very high quality sewage because you put in high quality, low TDS water, you get low TDS sewage. To that end, though, our friends at CSMA are going to have to address the infiltration of saltwater. They've got leaky sewers that are under the bay water that are driving their sewage up to levels that are 5 times the level of salt they start with in the sewage. If you compare Las Colinas to CSMA, there's a huge difference in salt levels because of the infiltration of salt water into the CSMA sewers. Okay. Any other board comments? Okay, hearing none. Could we have public comment?
Yes, we have 3 so far: Roger Roberts, Ed, and then Phil Sauter. Roger Roberts, please.
I assume you can hear me?
Yes,
Loud and
sir.
clear.
It's not clear to me what the list of potential project analyses will be. I've heard DPR mentioned tonight. I don't hear anything about conservation measures. And there's a whole host of things that could and should be analyzed and presented as part of this report. And I'm concerned about what the work product's going to be and what it's going to include. And when they do the analysis, will it indicate the level of supply that might be available and what its cost would be and what the effects would be on water rates? I think all of that is necessary, and I would hope that there'll be clarity on what's included and how it's analyzed and what the effects will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Could you speak to that, Ben?
All of his points will be addressed as part of the study. A very early task is going to be looking at a very wide array of possible projects, and we'll narrow it down to a much smaller group to be assessed in detail. Certainly the financial element will be assessed. There'll be criteria that will be developed early on to help in the decision-making process, and costs and dollar per acre will certainly be one, as will be, reliance on the water, the confidence, the long-term nature of it, uncertainties, risks. So there's going to be a really thoughtful criteria and decision-making process that we're going to bring to the board, and as Lucy described, will be discussed in detail at the workshops with the public.
And
Ed?
I'm thinking, Ben, perhaps we could post the scope of work, not so much in the detail that's in the board packet, but a line item kind of scope of work, just to help people know where we're going with that.
we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Okay, your turn, Terry.
Sorry. Ed, and then Phil Sauter, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you. I am really pleased to hear about the provision for public engagement. The two district webinars done last October were absolutely outstanding. People had a chance to ask questions and get answers. Paul Sellier seemed to know everything. It was quite impressive. So having said that, I got my water bill yesterday and was stunned to find in the envelope and on the waterfront insert that said, and I quote, "We have decided not to further pursue desalination as an option at this time," end quote. Where the heck did that come from? The upcoming Jacobs engineering plan process needs to proceed with open-minded consideration of all realistic, potentially significant possibilities, unprejudiced by premature declarations about the unsuitability of legitimate possible sources of drought-proof water, and that includes desal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed, or I'm sorry, Phil Sauter, please.
Yes, I'd like to echo Roger's request to elevate conservation to one of the topics that's looked at in detail. I'd also like to reach into the urban water management plan. And this is a question I remember asking 10 years ago and never got a clear answer. And I'm thinking maybe there isn't a clear answer, but there's an item in the water supply in the plan called losses. And I think when I asked the question 10 years ago, it was said that losses is always in quotes, that it's not really losses, it's a calculation. I think in the 2020 number that they came up with, it was the difference between what's produced and what's consumed. But it's always been kind of rough what that means. And the reason I'm bringing it up is the sheer size of that category, which is something between 2,000 and 3,000 acre feet. And I calculated that and I figured out that's about 10 gallons per day per capita. And when we're looking at conservation and asking people to track down every gallon, I would really like somebody to take a clear look at that under the microscope and see if there's any of those losses that can be recovered and be brought into use. And I'm hoping that maybe this study could at least give it a little, just a little comment somewhere along the line. Thank you.
It's a very good comment, Phil. Keep in mind that it has been the goal of every water district in the world to control lost water. And because, it's just like pouring money out of the pipe. The problem is, and I give absolute kudos to Marin Water in this one, they have spent, we as a community have spent a lot of money on chasing leaks. We are, I think, one of the most sophisticated water districts in the world on tracking leaks with listening devices and trying to get ahead of it. And like I say, it's tempting. And I think most of it is an error between large meters and small meters. But there is definitely leakage as well. And your point is well taken.
We have 4 speakers. 1402, please go first. And then Rick Adler and James Krajewski.
James Holmes Larkspur. In preparing the report, I would just like to emphasize the importance of minimizing the repetition of prior efforts and prior analysis, and to the avoidance for reinventing the wheel. It so often seems that when consultants are engaged, they recapitulate much of what has already been done, and I think that should be avoided here. I mean, you saw as well as I did, I'm sure, the letter in yesterday's paper that said much of the analysis has already been done, so the emphasis definitely should be on building on that analysis rather than recapitulating it. And additionally, I'd like to stress again that included in the analysis should be a discussion of ways and means to free ourselves of the dead hand of the 95 order that restricts our local supply. And additionally, even before that, I think discussion should be begun with our elected representatives whose political situations may make them particularly interested in following up on that, because I think ultimately this may require a legislative remedy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Adler, please.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't quick enough to raise my hand to offer my congratulations and praise and thank you for the excellent job on the pump station. I really do think that was wonderful, and you guys did an excellent job. And it goes to show that you're excellent staff and board members, top of the line, first rate, and I really appreciate that. Only problem is it's not good enough. In this day and age with this existential situation, we need you to be superheroes. And I'm sure you can do it. And I'm sure you will step up and become the superhero boards and superhero staffs to get us through this upcoming challenge of the drought and the constant increasing drought. And especially when it comes to implementing my ideas, I'm sure you'll do an excellent job.
All of them are covered in the report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Krajewski, please.
Hi, I'm also in favor of the more engagement with the public and the public meetings. What I would say is that it shouldn't be just aimed at educating the public, but they should also be aimed at getting feedback from the public so that it becomes a two-way street. And the other thing that I would emphasize is that I would hope that these meetings will be recorded and that there would be auto transcriptions to make it easy to go back and page through these things, because going through videotapes or tapes rather of meetings is tedious, and most people are not going to do that. But if you can scan through questions and answers and so forth from a transcription, it's much easier, just as it would be much easier if the board also transcribed their meetings, and it can be done automatically. So I would encourage the public outreach. Thank you.
It is being done automatically. If you look at the video, it is being transcribed as we talk. So we'll take a look at that. It's a very interesting comment and see if we can change the way we capture this information.
And our last speaker is Larry Meneghes.
Last but not least, and good evening all. Very good on the Castanya presentation and on this presentation. Want to thank you for both of those. And want to remark that this is not a new subject that we're having. The difference here is, as Ben was explaining, that this is more about implementation rather than planning, but that, as I recall, a lot of planning has been done in the past, and there's a lot of documentation that studies that you're already sitting on, and I shouldn't say sitting on, but that are there that can be utilized during this ongoing process, I believe. And I haven't heard really much discussion on that, but I believe you have a lot of information already available to you at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. And keep in mind that, to my recollection, this is the first time that Jacobs has ever worked for the water district. And the company that Jacobs purchased, CH2M Hill, is the largest environmental firm in the United States. They have something like 44,000 people. And so we have many new pairs of eyes looking at our issues in Marin with this retention of this firm.
There are no further speakers.
Okay, great. We need an action here, I believe. Yes. So I need a motion to.
I'll move approval.
I'll second.
Great. Okay, roll call.
Director Bragman. Director Gibson.
Aye.
Aye.
Director. Oh, thank you. Director Kohler.
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt
Aye.
and President Russell.
I thought Director Bragman was holding out on us there, or maybe we're like in a baseball strike or something. Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Let's move on to item 10. We have two more items, 10, and then we have the redistricting for the census.
Okay, great.
Okay.
I'll go ahead
Go
and
ahead, go
start
ahead.
off.
Have at it.
Thanks. So the board gave us clear direction to move towards a full environmental impact report on the East Bay Intertie project. And so I'm going to hand this over to Mark Casare, who's going to give you an overview of the scope of work that we've worked out for the project, for the contract. And go ahead, Mark, take it away.
Thank you so much, Crystal. Good evening again, directors. Mark Casare, Engineering Manager for Construction. So this agenda item 10, is an approval for a contract with Environmental Science Associates for a complete environmental review of the Emergency Intertie project, or the Intertie project. As you know, the current above average storage levels do afford some time for the district to undertake complete environmental evaluation of the Emergency Intertie project. And so, as Lucy was mentioned, while we evaluate water supply options, we are proposing to continue to make progress on the Intertie project, which remains an important water supply option for the district. So the agreement is provided in attachment 1 to the staff report. And as Crystal mentioned, it does anticipate the need for a full environmental impact report, or EIR. And the scope essentially consists of preparing a draft and final EIR, as well as preparing and filing all relevant CEQA documents. Additionally, the scope includes support services for environmental permitting, as well as stakeholder outreach and the attendance of public meetings. So the total cost for this agreement is just under $1 million. And if approved, it's anticipated to last approximately 12 months. And with that, we are asking that the board authorize the general manager to execute a professional services agreement with Environmental Science Associates for a total not to exceed contract amount of $998,030. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
So it's more of a philosophical question, which is, should this contract wait until the water supply study is finished? I think it's a discussion we should at least bat around and come to some kind of a decision, because I mean, maybe there is, you know, I mean, why are we doing this? Why are we doing the previous item is to put all the options on the table and make a decision. And, you know, it really comes down to timing, as far as how much time do we have? How much time do we have to do that study? How much time do we have to move forward with the option that we were headed towards because we didn't have time? So it's just something I think we need to discuss, and I think it's something that the public is going to be interested in.
I'm going to echo that sentiment, and for a couple of reasons. One is that we have a number of different water supply options that will be assessed with this study that we just approved. And, you know, there are a lot of opinions about what we ought to be, what is the most sensible project. And I think that an important part of that water supply assessment that we are now moving forward with is to really remain objective, that we are not predetermining the direction that we're going to go. And the previous comment, mentioning the information in our insert about that we're not pursuing desal, that's actually, I saw that was actually a communications error on our part, that we meant that was supposed to be a reference to temporary desal. But you know, the point is that this assessment that we are embarking upon, a great part of the value in it is that it remains objective, and that we let it play out, and that we let that information direct what we do next. If holding off on moving forward on this contract allows us to determine whether really it is an option we want to pursue or not, I think that seems logical, to not have the cart get before the horse, and to take the time to complete this in the next 5 to 6 months, completing this assessment. And then at that point, if the pipeline rises to the surface as a cost-effective, wise choice to continue to pursue, we've only lost 6 months and on what will still take many years to implement it under the current non-emergency alternative. So I think it is worth considering.
Okay.
I agree. I think that, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jack.
I was just gonna say, I disagree. I think taking it off the table now is making the reverse decision. It's making the decision that, at least for now, we're not going forward on this. I think we should be taking an approach, all systems go, get as much information as we can. If we do an EIR on the intertie, it will give us, because we'll have to look in that process at competitive projects. So it'll be a step forward for all of the alternatives we have, not just for the intertie. And if we don't do it, we're starting all over again if we later decide, yeah, this is the way we want to go. How can we make the decision that we want to go or not go until we've seen the EIR? Anyway, that's my.
So I'm going to agree with everybody right now. I think it is complicated. And I think the direction that we gave to staff was based on the reality that we were in a moving very fast, direction with the intertie based on what was at that point an emergency situation, consistent with CEQA. Having moved away from that, I think it made sense for us to continue forward movement, to your point, Jack. And the way to do that was to go forward with an EIR. And it was this, this notion of this kind of quick and dirty, for lack of a better way to put it, larger assessment came after that. So we've been, responding to a lot of things in a relatively short period of time. So it's not surprising that we are, we are where we are, which is where we're trying to do a lot of things at once. So I think where Jack and I are very much in accord is that the drought is not over. We need to be moving full steam ahead with some of these options. But I also feel that I've heard from management, a bit of a change from what I had thought I'd heard over the last 9 months or so, as far as some of the options that we were looking to spend literally hundreds of millions of dollars on, right? I mean, both the intertie and some further, relationship, some further expansion of the relationship with Sonoma are both very, very expensive options. And we may wind up going forward with either or both of them, or some of the other ones that have been discussed today. I'm a little conflicted. On the one hand, I see the benefit of going forward with an EIR. To Jack's point, it is a more formal opportunity to be looking at these options. On the other hand, it does seem to prejudge the assessment. And I have concerns about that. I think for a lot of good reasons, I think the district has done a lot of great work over the last 9-10 months of this drought. But I think some of that has been misunderstood and misinterpreted. I think we want to be in a position where we can look deeply at a lot of alternatives. But I also think that we need to be clear with the public about what we're doing and why. So I do have concerns about, on the one hand, doing an assessment of alternatives, and on the other hand, saying we're doing an EIR on the intertie, because it's not my understanding that EIR is going to be as comprehensive in scope in terms of the alternatives it reviews as the assessment is going to be.
True, but the assessment will get merged into the EIR at some point. So I know I'm sort of backtracking on my original point, and I do agree with Monty's sort of logical posturing about putting a cart before the horse. That being said, the assessment will get merged into the EIR. So the question is, really, do we want to, put $1 million down on a project that may prove to be less desirable than some of the other options that we come up with in the assessment? It's sort of hedging our bets.
I mean, the very, very theory of an EIR is that you're doing the EIR to determine whether the project is environmentally sound and whether it's a good project. So you're not predetermining where you want to go. And that violates the whole concept of an EIR.
But I don't think that we're talking about, and I want to be clear, I'm not prejudging that the intertie is a good project or a bad project. I think I'm trying to be responsive to the fact that our community is full of people who have very wide-ranging opinions about what we ought to be doing. And if we are moving forward with the intertie, what does that say to the folks who think we ought to be pursuing desal? What does that say, in general about whether we're remaining objective to this assessment, which is really 5 months, is all we're talking about postponing, moving forward with this EIR. If that assessment comes up with an analysis that says that it's a wise project to continue to pursue. I just think that it's not that much time to hold off and be informed by this other study that we have just agreed to, and let the public be part of that education process as well.
I'm feeling like I need to hear a bit from management on this, because I think the dilemma that the board has identified is a meaningful one. And so I'd really like to hear from Ben and maybe some other folks on his team about their feeling about, they've brought forward these two proposals. So I think it's fair to assume that they think we should be doing them in parallel. And I think it would be useful to hear from them about that.
And I think the other thing, Ben, let me pop in for a second.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that, as we'll all recall, I've been promoting this concept for a long time, that we should be paralleling the project with an EIR, and at least getting the kind of common parts done. I think all of us, I am 100% convinced, would have preferred that an EIR be done before anything to do with the emergency intertie pipeline were even discussed. There just was no time for us to do that. And as Larry Bragman correctly pointed out the other day on TV, nature brought us the time to do this thinking and head scratching. And I think that the EIR is the perfect vehicle to integrate public comment. It is designed for that purpose. And I think it is to not have it going while this is going, I think is a shortfall in our approach from my input. Anyway, Ben, go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to reflect that I'm not sure on the question that you're bringing to staff. I think the board has had some good discussion on the policy in terms of the considerations of moving forward on one hand in a more kind of logical way in a traditional sense, and moving forward with both of them could be more reflective of the drought that we just came out of in a sense of urgency. I think practically from an operational standpoint, either works. And the cost of, I thought it was described well, of the delay is a 5 or 6 month delay, which is not significant unless it is. And we don't really know that necessarily. So, but also we can't predict what's going to come out of the assessment in terms of where the EIR ranks. And while the other hand, the EIR will likely bring value to our overall understanding of the intertie, as well as the consideration of the alternatives, that work's going to be largely done certainly in the assessment. So I know I'm not being too helpful, because part of it is I thought the board very articulately kind of characterized the different approaches that you may want to take here. So I could, if there's more specific questions, I'd certainly be willing to respond.
Maybe I could jump in for a minute for staff. I'm really putting myself out here, but for me, doing the EIR doesn't push us to do the project. I mean, that's a decision that can be done later. If anything, it just prepares us to have the tools in the toolbox so that if we did find ourselves in a similar drought situation in the future, you know, the EIR would be done and we could move to construction sooner than later. But that's just my personal opinion on it.
So Crystal, so I had a similar thought, right? It's just listening today, you know, to the scope of the alternatives that are being considered in the study versus what I expect will be the scope of the alternatives in the EIR, which would be more narrow. So can you speak to that? Because it may be that as a result of the assessment, you know, the district management and the board decides to go in another direction and says, you know, the pipeline may not be the most feasible in light of the various risks that we've all been talking about for the last 9 months. And we're going to go in a very different direction. So at that point, you know, the EIR has already been scoped. I mean, I'm just trying to get my head around the parallel approach.
Let me try to give you a similar example. When we did the EIR for desal, the preferred environmental alternative was conservation.
Well, that's true.
But it was decided that conservation wasn't going to meet the needs. So they went ahead and analyzed the environmental impacts of desal. So it might be that environmentally, you know, that's the decision. When you talk about the preferred alternative, it's the preferred environmental alternative. It's not a preferred alternative in terms of like, what's the best, you know, long-term drought resiliency scenario. It's the preferred alternative IR is the preferred least environmental impact alternative.
What happens in the event, though, that we do this assessment and what we determine is that the most cost-effective direction to go is not the intertie for the time being, and we are midway through an EIR. Do we complete an EIR when we don't know that we would even construct the project in a near term? Again, I just worry about us, you know, investing funds into something that we may 5 months from now may find ourselves going, it is not our most cost-effective option to be focused on. And all we're talking about is waiting 5 months to find that out.
Monty,
Even if that is so, Monty, we're sitting there with the information that we'll have looked at and studied alternatives as well. We'll have built a significant amount of information going forward. Whether we go with the intertie or whether we go with another alternative, it will be information added. You know, so it's how can you have too much information?
And how can you have too much input from the public? That is what this does. And keep in mind, this is exactly what happened with the EIR on desal. It's exactly the same. Right. You know, we didn't ultimately go with desal, but we finished the EIR because you can't move forward until you move forward.
And if we go forward with desal in the future, we have all of that backup already done and sitting there on the shelf, ready to go.
So I think it's important to understand a little bit of the thinking that went into bringing both of these items at the same time, because it certainly wasn't, the staff didn't even think about the relationship between the two. I think that it's important to explain that, in fact, staff did think about the relationship between the two, understanding that even though you start an environmental review process, in fact, even an environmental impact report takes time, you do a lot of groundwork. And at the same time, we have quite a fast schedule on the assessment. Yes, some of the alternatives are going to rise to the top and some are probably going to fall away through the process as we understand further information. But we always believed and understood that the water supply assessment, analysis, potentially alternatives would be integrated into the environmental review process. Necessarily so. When you do an environmental review process, you have to use the information that you know. And so in determining alternatives, you also want to look at what are your project objectives. So all of that is yet to be done. Looking at what the objectives of the project would be. So there's a lot of groundwork, I think, to lay, and it wasn't that we thought we're doing this over here, we're doing that over here, and we'll just see what happens. I don't think it was an accident. So, I mean, I'm not saying the board can't change, the direction at this point. We were under the impression that the board was interested in pivoting to do a full environmental review of the intertie project. Certainly it's acceptable to pause, but I don't think that there's, sort of an intentional ignoring of the sort of how they work together and how they can complement each other.
Molly, let me ask you this, because it may be that the way to solve this is, by somewhat recharacterizing the EIR, right? I think the concern that you've heard from some of the board members tonight is that certainly from a communications and messaging perspective, saying that we're going to do an assessment of many, many, many options over here, and we're doing an EIR on only one of them over there, I think that's problematic. I think it's problematic for the board. I think it's problematic for many members of the public, as well as for the district staff itself. So is a potential solution to, and I don't mean to oversimplify, but to rename the EIR, because I understand what you're saying about these things. And I think, Jack, you've made this point well, is that it's your idea that the assessment will feed into the EIR. So instead of going forward with an EIR just on the intertie, which looks like we're selecting, I think it's hard to argue that it does not appear from a communications and messaging perspective that we are selecting one of the many, many things the assessment is going to review. Simply making the EIR a long-term water supply EIR.
Well,
more
I
in
think that's
line
a
with
really,
the assessment.
yes, I think that's a really interesting point, Director Kohler. I mean, there's certainly just different ways to characterize and to define the scope of the environmental review. I would say there's a difference between doing a programmatic environmental analysis and doing a project-specific environmental analysis. And typically you would have a preferred project, a preferred alternative if you're going to do a project-specific analysis. Maybe it's too soon to know that we're going to continue on the path with that preferred option. I have seen environmental documents in the past, environmental impact reports, in fact, have alternatives come in that are looked at, and then there's a recognition that in fact that is not just the preferred environmental alternative, it's the preferred alternative solution to meet the project objectives. So I think it's about how we embark upon the process, and certainly we can re-message, explain that just because we're looking at and doing a project level environmental review doesn't mean that we have to choose that project. And it does allow us to in the future pivot to an alternative that is superior in environmental impacts and otherwise for the district. So I think, yes, I absolutely think there was some thought put into that possibility as this was looked at.
So I'm not sure where you're landing. So,
well, I think to rename it, we can call it whatever we want. We want to be clear about the scope of work. Are we doing a project level environmental review, or are we doing a programmatic level environmental review? I think we want to do a project level environmental review. Programmatic simply looks at alternatives, simply looks at programs, doesn't necessarily get you all the way to implementation. What I hear the water supply assessment doing is wanting to move us towards implementation and environmental review with a preferred initially with a preferred project description or a project description, depending on how we define the objectives, could take us in that direction or could take us in another direction. So I think it's not the name so much as it is the level of environmental review, the how we're defining.
I appreciate that. I do think the name is important because I think to the public, tell me if I'm wrong here, we're going forward with a review of maybe as many as a dozen options, but we're also picking one right now tonight and we're doing a project level EIR. So I'm just having trouble reconciling that. And I think I think the public will unless I guess I just need to understand how you're planning on communicating that because I don't understand it.
Well, I think we can rename it, but I think ultimately you want to pursue a preferred alternative, right?
Well, of course, I mean, that's legally, we need to pursue a preferred alternative, but.
Right,
I'm
so
just
do we
what
want
the
to step
board-
back and leave the option open that the intertie isn't the preferred project that we're going to pursue and then do an alternatives analysis? I think we could pivot. I think we could be thoughtful in how we step into the environmental review process and how we describe and develop our project objectives so that we have that flexibility. And if we want to call it something else, I think that's fine too.
But
So if
at
it's
the
more
end of the
clear.
day, it gets us to the same place, right?
That intent would be for us to open that door to do the environmental review for a project that will help meet the objective. Yes.
Right. So when we finish, if we wanted to do the intertie, we'd have an EIR that satisfied that.
If that was the, we stayed that course and that was.
I'm looking for the way to change just the name, but stay on course. And sounds like you've given us that.
So what is the name that you're proposing?
You want me to think of it on the fly?
I do. No, I'm kidding. I thought Jack was saying that maybe I misunderstood Jack.
I like the name that you got. I'm leaving that up to you. No.
Yeah.
Water supply augmentation project. I really, it depends on, we could think about that more.
Yeah.
Well, plus the scope of work we have doesn't match that title. So the consultants needs to be re-reviewed if we're going to do that. But I think perhaps there is a solution here. What if we just roll forward what we got and we amend it? And as time goes on, we're making progress because, let's go back to what we started with. People are getting complacent about the drought being over. Well, it's not over. And we need to be careful here that we don't get behind the 8 ball any worse than we already are.
Yeah, we all agree with that.
This is a way to roll it forward.
We do. I think I'm hearing absolute consensus on that. What I'm also hearing is concern that we appear to be doing 2 different things at once. We're assessing a bunch of things, but we're choosing one to go forward with. So
we're not.
We're not. If
No,
we
are. We're doing an
we're
EIR on one, but I don't think that's the we're not at that decision point. But
no, I didn't mean we're at the decision point. I'm just talking about how it looks. Right, it's an EIR on.
But I mean, you know what? Given the unpredictability, I think we have to be able to have 2 competing concepts at the same time.
Okay.
The reality is not that neat. That being said, looking at the staff report, EIR is expected to be 12 to 14 months. It's going to take longer than that. I guarantee it, because you're going to have an overwhelming amount of public comment, not just from Marin, but from the entire Bay Area.
Yeah, that's true.
So I know I'm going back and forth, but just from a practical point of view, if we delay it for 5 months, okay, we've delayed 5 out of 14-month long study. Is that really prejudicial? I don't think it is.
Yeah, I just want to be clear though. So we get at the end of this assessment that we've just agreed to do, and this project does not rise to a high level of being implemented because other things have risen to the top. We continue with the EIR, we continue to spend the funds. I get that the point. The answer is yes,
It depends on what the alternative is, if I might just say. If we have an alternative that still requires an environmental analysis, which is likely the case, we could simply say, actually, we have a different preferred project, and now the intertie is an alternative. So that is possible. It's hard to predict. I'm sorry, Director Schmidt. I'm not trying to be opaque.
No, I know you're not. I just think that if they got it good, I feel sorry for our customers who are trying to make sense of what we're trying to do here. It feels real. I see that, I get that there's value in doing this EIR because we will learn information from it and that there'll be a public process that allows input on things. I get all that. I don't understand why waiting 5 months is such a bad idea. That's the part that I just don't get. And it's only, and I like information too. I think, and it would produce valuable information, but is that the most cost-effective, wise way to move forward? I want to respect that staff has really given this some thought, and I don't want to pretend that I've got the great insight and that the rest of everybody else has got it wrong. I still don't feel like I get why waiting 5 months to launch this, or with better information from the assessment, doesn't make sense. I don't see the risk in that, other than adding 5 months, and we might wish that we had those 5 months. I get that, but
I think I was answering a different question, Director Schmidt. I was not making a value judgment about whether waiting 5 months is good or bad, but simply offering up some greater context to understand that why we're here with both items.
At the same time, we're saying we have to continue with our conservation message. We can't rely on the fact that it appears the drought is over. And then we turn around and say, oh, but we can wait 5 months. Makes no sense.
Exactly, Jack. Exactly. And, you know, what I hear is people are assuming it's going to rain. Well, what if it doesn't rain? We need to move here. And I think waiting 5 months, it just puts us 5 months further behind the 8 ball. And then we get back in, if things stay the way they look, just look back at Paul Sellier's presentation and look at where he's at. He said, if we got no rain, we'd be at approximately the normal position at that point in time. But let's just say it doesn't rain the next year.
Right.
We're running out of time here.
Yeah, no, I agree we have to move. I'm just concerned about the impression that's going to be left by appearing to choose. I take Larry's point that we're not making a decision, obviously, but yeah, so I agree we have to move forward. I definitely do. I think the person I feel sorry for is Adrian, because this is going to be a challenging way to communicate.
Yeah.
Well, you might feel a little sorry for the consultant too. This may be a little bit complicated.
Yeah.
But you know, as Monty just said, you laid it out perfectly, Monty. We can change course, or Molly, one of you did. If we get to 5 months and it turns out that we've barking up the wrong tree, then we redirect the EIR. The common pieces of the EIR, all of these, any project we pick is going to share a large portion of the front end of the EIR. The issues on supply and demand and where we go and what impacts. So it's not wasted time. It is useful, meaningful, valuable presentation, documentation. And then if it branches at that point, at 5 months down the road, we say, oh yeah, look, this one's obviously the way to go. Okay, we reroute the EIR and send it down that path, just like Molly said.
Okay. For the sake of 9:30 in the evening and knowing that everybody is getting to, I don't want to, I see the value in it as well. And I won't oppose it if that's, I don't want to be a holdup for this. I think that it is very important. The drought is not over. We're not out of the danger. We've all been sending that message. We're not sitting on our laurels. Crystal just gave us a great presentation about all the things that we are doing and will continue to do. So I don't think we're at a risk of looking like we're sitting back on our heels here. We're not doing that, but let's move forward.
Thank you, Monty.
Okay. Ben, as I have noticed to you, I'm getting very concerned about the agenda. We have like 5 more items to go. It's 9:30 already. We've been at this for 2.5 hours. We need to get the public comment on this one. And then we have a public hearing yet, and then 3 more items after that. So I'm thinking we need to start thinking of what we're not going to do tonight.
I will do that as we move into comments and public hearing. I'll do some offline conferring with folks.
Okay, let's get the board happy for the moment. I mean, I understand you may not be 100% happy. Are we cool with going to public comment?
Okay.
Go ahead, Cynthia. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, did you want a motion first? Because this is an approval item, right?
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Sure. Why not?
Okay. Was that a motion? I'll second.
Okay, I'll make the motion.
Okay, cool. All right, now public comment.
We have three speakers, people, Mimi Willard, then Larry Minikes, and Rick Adler. Ms. Willard, please. Go ahead, Ms. Willard. Okay, we'll get back to Ms. Willard. How about Mr. Larry Minikes?
I shall try to be brief because it is getting late. One thing that isn't being mentioned here is that a lot of work has already been done on the intertie and the viability is already known and a good deal of money has been already invested there. So going forward with the EIR at this point, from a public standpoint, really does make sense because you're further along with this already than you are with whatever else is going to be looked at. So from that point of view, it really does make sense. Things aren't even. We've been talking about the intertie for a long time, and I understand what Monty's saying about waiting, but moving forward does seem to be the right direction to take. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
Thank you. Ms. Willard, are you able to speak now? Okay, Rick Adler then. Mr. Rick Adler.
Yes, thank you. It seems to me that we slid into this intertie project because the pipeline in 76 was a great success and the pipeline in Sonoma is a great success, and pipelines and pumps are in the DNA of the water board and the water agency, and the urgency of the drought just brought this thing forward. But I don't think it's a good project. The climate has changed since 76. The pipeline in Sonoma is going to change in the future. And this intertie project, I don't think it's going to work. I think it's a bad project. It's not going to work. And so I'd say cut it loose, put it on pause, and save the $1 million. You know, spend $1 million here, $1 million there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. And I'd rather see the $1 million spent on pursuing these other alternatives. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then we have Mr. James Krajewski.
Hi, thank you. I agree with Director Kohler that this is giving a very mixed message. I don't know why don't we do start off with the environmental report on diesel? And I guess I would say, which pipeline are we doing an environmental report on? There was a pipeline that originally was going to save us all with gobs of water. And then there was a pipeline at the end that I last heard about, which was only going to produce water for indoor use only. So I do think it's a very, very mixed message. I would much prefer to do an environmental report and start off with decel to give a better message, or find some way around this, because it's very strange to focus on this pipeline at this point. That's just basically a rescue pipeline, not a real source of water, the last I heard. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll try again with Ms. Willard. Ms. Willard.
Let's let it go, Terry.
Yeah, okay, there are no further speakers.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. We need a roll call.
Director Bragman.
I think we should delay it. No.
Director Gibson.
Aye.
Director Kohler.
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt.
Aye.
And President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, Ben, where are we going?
Well, we do need to roll into the public hearing. We can easily pull item 13, and maybe we can see how long the public hearing goes, and consider 14. That's a harder one to pull, but I'd say those would be the two. 13 is an easy call. 14's a bit tougher.
I would
Okay,
really like
well-
us to keep 14 on the discussion for today.
Okay,
I'm gonna say I have a hard stop at 10 because I have an extraordinarily early morning that I can't call, that I can't miss. So
That's cool.
I don't think that's gonna change the quorum, but I'm gonna need to sign off at 10.
no, we'll be done by 10.
Okay, rock and roll.
Okay, let's open or what do we need to do with the public hearing, Molly?
We need to have Jared Mills do our presentation on the redistricting, and then we can open the public hearing, receive comments,
Okay.
close the public hearing.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay.
All right, I'm Jared Mills. I'm the staff attorney at Marin Water, and let me share my screen really quickly. While I'm doing that, we're also joined tonight by two members of our GIS team, Gavin McGee and Mariette Shen, and then also Adrian Mertens, our communications manager, has been assisting with this process. Assuming it comes up. Can everyone
The
see that?
The slides are great, by the way. No, we can't see anything. I can see your face.
It is not sharing my screen.
Do you want
for
me to
some reason.
share it, Jared? I can just go ahead and do it.
That would be excellent, Terry.
Okay, hold on, let me pull it up. Okay. There we go.
All right, thank you very much. So tonight's the first public hearing on redistricting. The division map here to the right is actually on the district's website. So members of the public can zoom in for their address, see their district and the boundaries of the existing district. Terry, can you go on to the next slide? The overview tonight, we're just going to go over the background of the divisions, the redistricting overview, and 2020 census data, census voting age population data, a few proposed adjustments, the next steps in the redistricting process, and then we'll conclude by conducting the first public hearing on redistricting. Next slide, please. So the district's governed by a board of directors, 5 members, each represent a geographical area. And as I noted just a minute ago, more information about the current division boundaries is on our website at that link. Okay, next slide. Those unfamiliar with the redistricting process may be asking, what is redistricting? Redistricting is a mechanism every 10 years that involves adjustment of division boundaries following the release of US Census data. The primary purpose of doing this is just ensuring that there's equal populations within each division. And that aligns with the principles of equal representation and kind of the principle of one person, one vote. Next slide, please. The district has to follow these 2 statutory requirements for its redistricting process. The first being the water code tells us that we have to redistrict pursuant to elections code 22,000. When you read that section, it requires us to do a couple of things. One is ensure that every 10 years we take a look at our districts and ensure that the divisions are equal in population as far as practicable, and that they comply with the US Voting Rights Act and also applicable state and federal laws. One thing that's important for members of the public that may be attending tonight, this process does differ from that used by cities and counties. Next slide, please. So the criteria, in addition to ensuring that the populations are near equal and also that we're in compliance with all applicable laws, the board may give consideration to the topography, geography, I'll just say cohesiveness to keep it simple, and the community interest of each division whenever they're considering any adjustments. The community of interest will be one portion tonight during the public hearing aspect that members of the public can provide input if they believe that a certain group or certain areas should be included in one district for proper representation. They can present those ideas to the board and staff. Next slide, please. So just going over the 2020 census data, trends. Whenever we gathered this data, we saw that the district's population increased by a little over 8,200 people. The division population total is now 192,961. And this increased the average number of people per division from 36,950 to 38,592. Overall, the trend is the distribution of population remains substantially equal between all the divisions. Terry, can you go to the next slide? So whenever we look at the 2010 census data on the left, that had the division totals and then also the total population. Looking at 2020, we have each division's population, we have the total, and then we also have the average population. This is what we call the ideal population per division. The right column here includes the percentage of deviation from that average or ideal population per division. So whenever we look at it, we see that Division 2 has the largest population and the deviation is 1.07%. Division 5 has the smallest population out of the 5 divisions. And this is using the current district maps with the new population totals plugged in. One thing that we need to focus on that's very important to redistricting is just the total deviation range of the plan. And essentially the way you get this is just the largest census population per division minus the lowest divided by this average population. And whenever we get that, it's a little over 2%. Federal case law has indicated that anything less than 10% is presumed to be valid. Next slide, please, Terry. So this is just the racial and ethnic data of each division broken down using the total population numbers from the 2020 census. Beyond just breaking this down for informational purposes, it's not extremely important to the redistricting process. One thing that I took note of is Division 2 has changed where no racial or ethnic group is now a majority. So it's a plurality diversion or division. Next slide, Terry. So this next slide is the census voting age population. So these percentages differ a little bit from the total population numbers because this only includes people that are United States citizens, age 18 and up, who could be eligible voters. This is important for the Voting Rights Act, just ensuring that any changes to division boundaries are not going to dilute the minority vote and impact their ability to influence elections and elect candidates of their choice. Okay, next slide. So the proposed census related adjustments, we're not seeing any adjustments being needed to maintain the substantially equal populations. As I said, the deviation's to about 2%, and federal case laws allowed deviations up to 10% to be found valid. At this point, essentially tonight, we're gonna just propose a status quo division map with some minor adjustments being made to align with census block boundaries. Okay, next slide. One thing that's kind of important, and tonight our GIS team, they're on the call, so they can also provide more information about this, but the way that the census data is provided is in very odd shapes. So for example, this kind of dashed area here would essentially be similar to a census block. All the information for the population is found within there. However, you just get the information from the center of that shape, and that tells you how many people reside there. So whenever we were looking at the data and pulling the maps together, we actually saw, I believe it's Manor View there. The census block wrapped around to Manor View, and I don't know, Terry, if you can show your cursor on that. It's directly below the hashed line. And there's a roadway there. Well, there are about 14 residences there that were actually included in this census block whenever we look at it. So we're proposing on this one actually dividing this census block into half. And what that will ensure is these residents maintain representation in the Fairfax area. And, we felt that that would maintain the community of interest, and also right above where it says kind of Division 1, Sleepy Hollow, this is a steep ridge. So kind of the geographical features of the area and the topography made us want to include those in Division 3 and maintain that. While
let's pick it up a little, Jared. Can we speed it up a little bit?
Yep. Okay, next, Terry. So on this, basically, it's just keeping the land in Division 1, and the bay would be in Division 2 for the purposes of the map here and the changes being proposed, with the exception down to the south. These are going to have no population changes. Next, Terry. And really quickly, Director Russell, one thing that we could do, just because timing is a consideration tonight, these are all published on the website.
Absolutely.
So rather than going through them one by one, board members could send us comments, and then also the public's going to have several weeks to comment on these.
Yes, and Jared, I want to compliment you on the slides. They're excellent.
Yes, I can't take all the credit. That's GIS and our comms team as well. So
it's in your presentation.
Okay, so let's skip ahead, Terry, really quickly. The census boundary changes, except for the first one, did not involve any population changes. So therefore, I don't see any issues with those. Most of those are vacant parcels being addressed, but board members can let us know, and members of the public can also let us know. The other proposed changes that we're thinking about making are non-census related, and this is just ensuring that our boundaries are aligning with LAFCO boundaries for the district service area. And basically, this is addressing annexed parcels or removed parcels and alignment with city and town boundaries. So Terry, can you go to the next slide? So here, these are examples of some of the LAFCO changes. You'll see that this roadway has been removed from the district's LAFCO service area. So we're just proposing that the district boundary maps align with that. Terry, if you go to the next slide. This is kind of the same. Keep going to, it is LAFCO change number 7. So this one differs slightly from the others. These others are basically just LAFCO boundary changes involving right-of-ways and small things like this. This is actually a LAFCO adjustment acknowledging that portions of San Rafael actually became incorporated into Ross here. And there were a few residents impacted here. I believe 3 parcels is what our GIS team told us. So by moving this area here in the middle into Division 3, essentially what that will do is ensure that everyone in Ross knows that the representative is, Director Bragman. Okay, can you continue on, Terry? So, since we went through that very quickly tonight, one thing that I want to point out to members of the public who spent their time waiting for this item is the proposed division map. And all the slides presented tonight are available on our district website for redistricting, marinwater.org/redistricting. We also have an interactive map that has the changes. So if you weren't able to tell from the slides tonight, the exact area or location, you can actually go to that interactive map and they're pinpointed on there. Also on the website, we'll have public comment where people can submit written comments for the next several weeks. And based upon the written comments received from both, board members and the public, what we'll do is we'll take this back to the Finance and Administration Committee on February 24th to address any issues, if any are raised. If not, we'll proceed to the second public hearing on March 1st, 2022, and we'll hold a public hearing at that time to adopt the new division boundary maps that include the changes that we proposed tonight. One thing I will point out is a final map does have to be adopted by April 17th, 2022, pursuant to a new law that was adopted by the legislature. And with that, Terry, can you go to the next slide? If the board has any comments or questions, I'm happy to answer them. We have our GIS team here as well.
Any questions from the board? Okay, then I think we should open the public hearing.
Okay. There are no comments. Oh, I'm sorry. There is one now. Rick Adler. Mr. Adler. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to take this opportunity to ask about that a lecture on Highway 37 on Friday. How do I find that?
That's
It's a
North Bay
North Bay
Watershed
Water.
Association. Yeah.
Say that again?
No,
North Bay Water.
no, North Bay Watershed. Terry, could you forward that to Mr. Adler?
Yeah, Mr. Adler, if you can just go ahead after the meeting, send me an email and I'll send that to you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
There are no further comments.
Hearing no further comments, I will close the public hearing and move on. Thank you very much, Jared. It was very entertaining and useful.
Thank you. Have a good
Okay,
night.
is there anything else we need to do, Molly, on this?
Well, I would defer to Ben, but I believe we need to take item 12. I think that could be quick.
Well, no, not the
Oh, on
meeting.
this
I'm talking
one.
about this item.
No, not tonight.
Okay.
Just
And President Russell, if I could, for the remainder of the agenda, item 12 is time sensitive. Pulling 13 would work, and 14. I do appreciate, I heard some comments of interest moving forward to it. One option would be to move it to the Water Resiliency Committee on the 8th, and we could still
let's
take
do
the
that.
direction we get
Yeah.
and bring it to the next board meeting and not have lost any time.
Okay, does that work for everybody?
It's fine.
Okay, cool. Then let's attack the one you need. The 12th you need to get through. So let's attack the 12th and then we're done, huh? I think, Ben, for this today, after this.
If the board accepts that approach, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, President Russell. This item is actually going to the City of San Rafael Board of their City Council on the 7th of February. So it is time sensitive. We have Jake Miller here tonight. We need to bring him over from the attendee group and he'll give you the presentation.
Quickly, Chris.
Quickly, yes. Terry, yeah.
Go ahead.
Jake, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yeah, just bringing it up. There we go. Good evening, everyone. Let's see. Can you all hear me?
Yes. Loud and clear.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm Jake Miller, Associate Engineer in the Design section, and I'm here to present item number 12, requesting the Board of Directors to authorize the General Manager to negotiate and execute a revised reimbursement agreement between the City of San Rafael and Marin Water for the 3rd Street Rehabilitation Project. Marin Water and the City of San Rafael are jointly pursuing a major road and water infrastructure project along 3rd Street to be administered by the city as part of the 3rd Street Rehabilitation Project. On November 16th, the Board of Directors approved Resolution 8658, authorizing the General Manager to finalize and execute a reimbursement agreement with the City of San Rafael for an amount not to exceed $2,870,846 based on the City of San Rafael's and Marin Water's engineers' estimates. On January 18th, the City of San Rafael received and opened 5 bids for the project. Gelati Brothers submitted the lowest bid for the project in the amount of $18,248,707.54. including a bid of $3,025,275 for the pipeline portion of the project. The bids for the pipeline portion of the project were higher than anticipated, and the cost exceeds the amount authorized by the Board of Directors on November 16th. The reason for the bid price being higher than the estimate is likely due to the contractor charging a premium for working on higher traffic streets, requiring more traffic control safety measures, and reduced construction footprint. The high project bid price did, however, reduce the reimbursement ratio for the construction management fee shared with the city from 16.8% to 16.6%. The action requested is approval of a resolution which increases the amount for reimbursement agreement to to the revised estimate of $3,340,603. District staff recommends the Board of Directors authorize the General Manager to negotiate and execute a reimbursement agreement between the City of San Rafael, Marin Water, in an amount not to exceed $3,340,603 for the construction cost, construction management fee, and the paving credit. Any questions?
Thank you, Jake. Any questions from the board? Okay, any public comment?
I have a question.
Director
Oh,
Bergman?
go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I support the project, and I know it's time sensitive. My question is, why not bid the project out ourselves? It just seems every time we get into these joint bidding arrangements that the cost of our discrete part of the project seems to get inflated a little bit. So why not just do our bid and then just fold it into the master plan?
Director Bragman, we do choose to bid it ourselves in some instances. For example, on the Mill Valley Blytheville project, we will be bidding that as a separate contract rather than wrapping it into their paving project for Blytheville improvements. And part of the reason is as we negotiate with the various jurisdictions, they give us estimates on their construction management fees and their opposite of that, permit fees, if we were to go out on our own. So we balance the two costs, and we typically go for what we think will be the lower cost option to either go it alone or go with their contract.
Okay, well, good enough. I mean, this thing's got to go, so I support the project. So
Okay, cool. Any questions, any comments from the public?
There are none.
Okay, can I get a motion?
I'll move approval.
second.
Roll
Director
call.
Bragman, Director
Aye.
Bragman, Director
Aye.
Gibson,
Aye.
Director Kohler,
Aye.
Vice President Schmidt,
Aye.
and President Russell.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, so Ben, we can go to future agenda.
Yeah, and in fact, on future agenda, there's nothing, notable that's not calendared. So if the board reviews it, has any questions, you can just let Terry and I know, and we'll respond to you.
Okay, cool. Okay, with that, we're going to close the meeting.
All right.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Have a good evening, folks.